All right. Mr. Doyle, how are you? I'd like to call the hearing to order this morning. Today, the committee is going to continue its work on the discussion draft of our energy bill that we've been working on with the Democrats. We began the dialogue last week with a hearing on the energy workforce title to the bill. And today we're going to be focused on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and the energy efficiency part of the legislation. The current debate over the SPR is a familiar one to those who have witnessed how America's dramatically changing energy landscape has rendered many existing policies out of date. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve was created under the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975 and has since served as an insurance policy in the form of an emergency stockpile of oil. However, much has changed over the last 40 years, and there is bipartisan agreement that we're overdue to update the SPR to reflect the needs of 2015 and beyond. One of the problems that we're having, of course, relates to infrastructure issues associated with the SPR. Specifically, the oil boom is underway near the SPR's location in Louisiana and Texas and is already stretching the local infrastructure to its limits. This raises questions whether there is sufficient infrastructure available to successfully draw down the SPR in the case of an emergency. DOE and others have found that the 40-year-old stockpile is in a poor state of repair, raising doubts about whether it is ready to be utilized in a timely and efficient manner. There are also questions about the legal trigger tapping the SPR and whether it constrains the President from anticipating problems justifying a release. So we're going to be looking a lot at the SPR, and we appreciate our witness here today who will address that issue. The bill also will contain a number of energy efficiency provisions. Many of them certainly deal with the way the federal government, by far the nation's largest energy user, can do more for less. This includes provisions that would certainly emphasize the importance of energy savings performance contract for federal facilities. There are also requirements for DOE to look into potential energy savings from federal data centers and through the use of thermal insulation, as well as other ideas that may help reduce federal energy expenditures. So we have two panels of witnesses this morning. On the second panel, I think we have 5 or 6 witnesses. The first, we have our guest from the federal government, who I'll introduce in just a minute. But with that, I'll yield back the balance of my time. And Mr. McNerney, are you going to be making a statement for your side, or is Mr. Rush going to come?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I don't have a prepared statement at this point. I don't have a prepared statement.
Okay, all right. Is there anyone else on our side that would like to make a statement this morning? Okay. Yeah. I'll tell you what we'll do. When Mr. Rush gets here, we'll give him an opportunity to make an opening statement. But at this time, I'd like to introduce our only witness on the first panel, and that's Christopher Smith, who is the Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy at the Department of Energy. Mr. Smith, thank you very much for being with us again, and I'd like to recognize you for 5 minutes for your opening statement. So be sure the microphone is on, and as you know, the red light will come on when your 5 minutes is up. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the opportunity to appear before this committee. Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Rush, and members of the committee, it is my pleasure to appear before you today to discuss the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve provides strategic and economic security against foreign and domestic disruptions in oil supplies via an emergency stockpile of crude oil. It also fulfills the United States obligations under the International Energy Program, which avails the United States of International Energy Agency assistance through its Coordinated Energy Emergency Response Plan. As you know, Earlier this month, the Department announced the award of contracts for the repurchase of crude oil sold during last year's test sale. Under terms of these contracts, which were funded by the $239 million in receipts from the test sale, BP Products North America and Noble Americas will deliver more than 2 million barrels to the reserve's Bryan Mound site in Freeport, Texas. Deliveries are expected to be completed by July 31st. I'd like to elaborate on the 2014 test sale because it did a couple of important things. First, it resulted in the delivery of nearly 5 million barrels of crude oil over a 47-day period and brought in more than $468 million in receipts. A portion of those receipts was used to fund the Northeast Gasoline Supply Reserve, which was established as a result of Superstorm Sandy in 2012. This reserve consists of 1 million barrels of government-owned gasoline stored in 3 locations in the Northeast. At the same time, the test sale evaluated drawdown and sales procedures and validated the operational capability to draw down the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. I'd like to talk about that drawdown capability for a moment. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is a network of 60 operational caverns at 4 sites in Louisiana and Texas with a total design capacity of 713 million barrels of crude oil and currently holding 691 million barrels available for release in the event of a supply disruption. The infrastructure and equipment to support drawdown, including storage caverns and wellbores, is both large and complex. This aging infrastructure, which has performed capably to meet every emergency release throughout the SPRO's history, requires progressively more maintenance every year and is in need of modernization. With regard to modernization, the Department has initiated work on a comprehensive long-term strategic review of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in response to changing market and energy security dynamics. This review will be guided by the recommendations contained in reports conducted by the GAO and the Department's Inspector General. It will also be informed by the recommendations from the Administration's recently released Quadrennial Energy Review. The QER underscores the Administration's support for an effective Strategic Petroleum Reserve modernization program that would address infrastructure issues and reflect current market and energy security concerns. Specific recommendations include investing as much as $2 billion to increase the incremental distribution capacity of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and implementing a life extension program for key Strategic Petroleum Reserve components, including surface infrastructure and additional brine drive caverns. The QER also recommends that Congress update the Strategic Petroleum Reserve's release authorities in the Energy Policy and Conservation Act to expressly include disruptions in the global oil market as release triggers to revise release requirements. Finally, the QER recommends the integration of the President's authorities to release products from the Refined Petroleum Product Reserve into a single unified authority. These release authorities should be tailored to the purpose of a product reserve, which may differ in some respects from the purposes of crude oil reserve. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to answer any questions that the subcommittee may have.
Mr. Smith, thank you very much. And at this time, I'd like to recognize Mr. Rush for his opening statement.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, Mr. Chairman, I want to welcome our esteemed witness. I thank you for holding this hearing today on 2 very important but yet completely unrelated issues, the SPR and the energy efficiency standards. Mr. Chairman, I agree with the underlying assumption that it is time to engage in a comprehensive review of the SPR, which was originally authorized under the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975 in order to reduce the domestic impact of a disruption in supplies of petroleum products due to unforeseen or unavoidable circumstances. And I commend Secretary Moniz for initiating the process to conduct a comprehensive review of the SPR following both the July 2014 DOE Office of Inspector General report and the GAO Office study issued in September of last year recommended that the Department do so. Mr. Chairman, circumstances have changed significantly since the SPR was established back in the 1970s. So it makes sense to examine future SPR requirements regarding size, composition, and geographic location to make sure that the country is better suited to deal with any potential and future disruptions. Additionally, with little funding coming from Congress, I think it also behooves us to consider the resources necessary to operate the SPR and to ensure its long-term sustainability in order to preserve the infrastructure and the maintenance of these sites. Mr. Chairman, as for the other panel regarding a completely different topic, I must say that I hope that we will hold an additional hearing on DOE energy efficiency standards where members will have an opportunity to hear from the agency in a direct manner while engaging industry and other stakeholders, as we will do today, should be a part of the process that should not preclude having agency officials come before this committee to inform members on the reasoning and the justification behind promulgating the various standards that are under discussion. Mr. Chairman, many of the energy efficiency measures contained in the draft bill are non-controversial and are bipartisan in nature, such as Section 4114, which modifies the definition of renewables to include thermal energy under the Federal Renewable Energy Purchase Requirements established in Section 203 of EPAC 2005. This language represents an example of DOE, industry, and energy efficiency advocates all working together to come up with a legislative fix that all sides have agreed to. However, there are other provisions, several provisions, as a matter of fact, of this bill that are not bipartisan and do not reflect agreement on the part of the various stakeholders. For instance, Section 4115, which would repeal a key portion of Section 433 of the Energy Independence and Security Act, the provision that requires federal buildings to be designed to result in decreased consumption of fossil fuels by 2013 is one section among others that we will definitely have to examine further and continue to work on before we reach bipartisan consensus. Mr. Chairman, as this is only a discussion draft and will undergo significant changes, I am satisfied with engaging today's expert witnesses so that we may be better informed on how to improve this draft as we move forward through the legislative process. But, Mr. Chairman, we need to have additional hearings and additional work, and I know that you will agree with me, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time, and at this point, Mr. Smith, we once again thank you for your statement, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Back in 2014, GAO issued a report entitled The Changing Crude Oil Markets, allowing exports has price and other implications, and the size of the strategic reserves should be re-examined. In the letter that you sent to us, you indicated that DOE has initiated the process for conducting a comprehensive re-examination of the appropriate size of the SPR in light of current and future market conditions. I was just curious, what is the status of that review, and do you have a timetable when you all might complete that?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the question. So, indeed, we think it is very important to undertake a comprehensive strategic review, which I believe is the position of the committee, and I think it's something that we've got kind of concurrence on. We've already started that process. As we know, and as was noted in your statement, there are many factors that have changed since the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was initially created in the 70s. So our comprehensive review is looking at a very wide range of issues, looking at modernization, looking at distribution capability, looking at issues that are driven by the appropriate size of the reserve. So we're already started on that process. We're working on that, and we believe that the total review will take something will take several months to complete, towards a year for the culmination of that report.
Are you personally concerned about, I talked a little bit about the infrastructure issue, and because of the shale boom and the capacity limitations that we have, are you concerned at all about the infrastructure aspect of this?
Well, I am, Mr. Chairman. You know, one note, I imagine that our team who's managing this process would bristle at the characterization of the SPRO being in a poor state of repair. I think we've got a tremendous team that's you know, doing all the things that they need to do to make sure that the SPRO is ready. And indeed, every time we've had a test sale or we've had to use the SPRO, that team has performed admirably. That said, it is an aging asset. We have well bores that have been in place for decades, and as you drill, you know, into these salt dome structures, they move over time, and it causes issues. So, not only are we concerned about ensuring that we're funding this in a way that keeps allows us to keep up with deferred maintenance, but also many infrastructure issues such as the direction of pipelines, the inflow of crude, the types of crude that are coming into the refineries in the Gulf of Mexico has changed, and we think it's important for us to consider all these things. So we think these, you know, we agree with the committee's conclusion that these are critical things to study and analyze.
I think you had indicated there's something like 691 million barrels of oil, crude oil, in storage.
Right.
Is most of that heavy sour crude, or is there a light sweet as well?
So there's, you know, we've got a total of 691 million barrels of crude in storage right now. That's split between sweet and sour, so we've got approximately 260 million barrels of sweet. We've got about 430 million barrels of sour, so we've got a split between sweet and sour.
And do you happen to know the number of gallons of crude that are in public storage in our country today?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, Mr. Chairman.
I was told it was in the neighborhood of 500 million barrels. Do you have any? Does that sound right to you, or have you heard about it?
That might be a reasonable number, Mr. Chairman. I don't know what that figure is off the top of my head.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much, and Mr. Rush, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Smith, in your testimony, you stated that the SPR is a network of 60 operational caverns at 4 storage sites in Louisiana and Texas, with a design capacity of 713.5 million barrels and 115 operational well bores. I would imagine that these facilities see a lot of wear and tear over the years and require quite a bit of upkeep and maintenance. What's the state of these facilities and how are they maintained? Is there a funding stream dedicated to the upkeep and maintenance of these facilities? And what can we as members of Congress do to assist you in maintaining these facilities?
Well, thank you very much, Ranking Member Rush, for that question. So we request a appropriation every year that we use to maintain the SPRO and ensure that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is ready for drawdown. In our budget request that we recently, the President recently released, we did ask for a total of $257 million for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which was an increase over budget requests in previous years. Of note, I guess the marks we're seeing right now would result in a $45 million decrease in the amount that we requested, which does impact our ability to tackle some of the deferred maintenance that we think is important. As I briefly noted, some of these well bores are 20, 30 years old. As you're drilling through the cap rock and into these salt dome caverns, you do have movement over time that compromises the well bores. There's lots of above ground issues that you have to deal with to ensure that all of your pumps, your compressors, your valves, your corrosion issues are taken care of. So it's our intent to ensure that we are chipping into some of this deferred maintenance backlog. And indeed, that was reflected in the request that we made in this round in this budget submission and the congressional justification that we submitted. So we do have a plan to ensure that we're ready to execute. Historically, we've always been able to accomplish the mission. I think that's a testament to the folks that we have working down in Louisiana and Texas on these sites. But there is work that has to be done on an ongoing basis, and we think that funding that at appropriate levels is very important.
What were some of the most important lessons that we learned from the operational test cell in terms of evaluating the drawdown and sales procedures, as well as analyzing potential commercial infrastructure investments?
So we learned a number of things. First of all, there was a $5 million test sale. We were successful in getting all 5 million barrels pushed to the market. We did learn some things about some shortcomings. We noticed some issues with the Texoma distribution group or pipeline system that probably needs to be addressed. We also specifically identified a metering skid at one of the sites that if anything sold has to go through a single metering skid. So if you have two opportunities to move crude out of that site, you'd have to do it sequentially, one after the other. That's a significant bottleneck and something that we could address, and just by putting in a new metering skid would be able to significantly increase the capacity of that site. And these were things that we noted in our congressional justification for the 2016 budget that we recently submitted.
Now, the reduction in the 2016 budget, would there be, can you project the ramifications of that? Is that going to significantly affect or drastically affect your ability to achieve your mission?
Well, we think that these things are important. One of the reasons why we did the test sale was to identify areas of improvement, bottlenecks, things that we had to do to improve the distribution capabilities of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It's a valuable asset, but you do have to maintain it. You do have to manage it. So we think that it is critical and important to not only take care of the deferred maintenance that we are concerned about, but also to make specific upgrades such as the additional metering skid that would increase our ability to serve more than one offtake at a time, and that would, as a result, increase the Strategic Petroleum Reserve's ability to push crude into the market in the case of an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Petroleum, did you want to make an opening statement?
Sure. Sorry that I was late. I was at the other hearing on 21st Century Cures. I'll try to cut back on it, but I did want to yield a minute to Mr. Welch. So, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say that I think I've made it clear that I'm interested in working with you and Chairman Upton on energy legislation, but I'm concerned about the format of today's hearing. I can't recall a time when this subcommittee has crammed two completely unrelated topics into one hearing, and I think it does a disservice to members and to the subject matter, because both of these subjects are important and really warrant not only separate legislative hearings, but also they should be preceded by more oversight. With regard to the specific proposals before us, I recognize they do not represent anything more than discussion drafts of potential legislative language that could go into an energy bill. However, as this efficiency title is currently constituted, I would not be in a position to support it or to recommend that others support it. In particular, I'm opposed to language in the discussion draft that repeals Section 433 of the Energy Independence and Security Act, signed into law by President George Bush. Section 433 established groundbreaking energy efficiency performance standards for the design of new federal buildings and those federal buildings undergoing major renovation, rightly ensuring that new federal buildings be designed to result in decreased consumption of fossil fuels. The draft would prohibit DOE from promulgating a final rule updating efficiency standards for gas furnaces until an advisory group completes an analysis and determination. And I certainly understand that there are concerns out there, but stakeholders have been working towards a resolution mutually agreeable to all parties. Now, however, some stakeholders apparently decided to try to do an end run by proposing this language, halting DOE's efficiency efforts from moving forward, and the draft sets up an opponent-dominated advisory panel and gives more weight to the anti-efficiency factors being examined in the analysis. In my opinion, this greatly sets back any progress made towards good faith efforts to sincerely resolve concerns with the DOE's proposal. The building code efficiency provisions in the draft is another area of great concern to me, as currently outlined changes to DOE standards authority in this area would do great harm to what has been a very successful and impactful program. That said, I do want to make clear I do believe there is a sincere effort on both sides to try to find common ground, and I remain optimistic that we can develop a bipartisan energy package. We're early in our process, and there are many ideas from both sides of the aisle that have not yet been considered. In raising these issues up front, I hope that we can have a more concerted bipartisan collaboration moving forward. Mr. Chairman, last week the Obama administration released its first installment of the Quadrennial Energy Review. I know it was mentioned at a previous hearing by Mr. Doyle, and this is a great government-wide effort to look at key aspects of the nation's energy infrastructure that contains many useful insights, including some recommendations that would require legislation. We need to review that report carefully because I think it provides us with an opportunity for our committee to work closely with the administration to put together meaningful energy legislation that addresses the 4 areas of your Architect of Abundance framework and that the President, I think, ultimately would sign. So let me thank you again for holding this hearing, for your hard work in bringing these provisions forward, and for your willingness to work with us to make this into a product that we might all be able to support. And I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Welch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pallone. Thank you, Mr. Pallone and Mr. Rush, for your leadership on energy efficiency. And I really am grateful to our Chairman, Mr. Whitfield, and Chairman Upton for their focus on this. Energy efficiency is such an area where we can work together and make real progress. It saves money, creates jobs, it's better for the environment. We've made progress. Mr. McKinley and I, in others, sponsored legislation that President Obama is going to sign into law this afternoon, and it's only a beginning. What we know is that energy efficiency is literally the lowest cost electricity resource for utilities. And from 2008 to 2012, new efficiency improvements from utility programs and appliance standards have avoided the need for more than 275 power plants. So we've got an opportunity to focus on the common ground where whatever the fuel source, less is more. It can be nuclear, it can be coal, it can be solar. If we find efficiency, we're going to put people to work retrofitting our homes in our commercial buildings. We're going to save on fuel bills, and we're going to do a significant improvement of the economy. So I am grateful to the bipartisan approach we've got, and there's work to be done, and I'm glad this committee is going to do it. Thank you, Mr. Pallone. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, for 5 minutes.
Am I asking questions or giving a statement? Questions. Okay, I didn't know. I just got here. I've got 2 hearings going on, and I'm still asleep because Mr. Doyle's baseball team is so good that we're getting up now before dark to start practicing to try to be competitive with them. Yeah. Well, that's probably true. But arrogance sometimes leads to its own downfall. So anyway, Mr. Smith, Honorable Smith, we're glad to have you here today. I think you know that I've introduced a bill that would repeal the current ban on crude oil exports. It also has a section that requires the Department of Energy to conduct a study and to send the results of that study to this committee and the Senate Energy Committee within 120 days about the status of the SPR and what we should do with it. Do you know if the Department of Energy supports that part of the repeal bill?
So just understand the question, Congressman. Do we support the issues on export, or support doing the study on
The study on the strategic. I can make it a two-part question.
Okay.
Unless you just want to say yes, in which I'll yield back to the chairman.
I want to make sure I understand the question.
Yeah, no, I've had some discussions off camera with the Secretary of Energy about repealing the crude oil export ban. My question to you, since this hearing is on energy efficiency and what to do with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, is whether the department supports that part of the bill on crude oil, repealing the ban on crude oil exports, that requires a study of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and that study be reported to the Congress within 120 days.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question, Congressman, and the clarification. So we certainly do support the idea of doing a comprehensive review of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. In fact, that's a process that we already have underway. We of course will comply with the laws as written. I would say that a comprehensive study that looks at infrastructure issues, that looks at subsurface issues, that look at geologic issues, that looks at market issues, all the things that would help us come to some conclusions over the appropriate size and the scope of work that needs to do to modernize the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It would be difficult to do that in 120 days.
Do you have a time frame that you would prefer? We wanted to get it back fairly quickly, but since our bill hadn't had a legislative hearing yet, we're very flexible. Right. Would 180 days be better? Would you like a year? What's the magic number?
Well, 180 days would be better than 120 days. I think the estimate that we'd made for doing a piece of work of that magnitude was several months. So it would be considerably longer than the current 120 days that you've proposed. But that said, we've got a great team, and we'll accomplish what we can in the time that we're given. But in order to address what we think are fundamentally, comprehensively different set of conditions than we had when the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was initially put in place under EPCA back in the 70s, that's actually a big piece of work.
Right.
And we'd like to make sure that we've got the ability and the time to get that right.
When we put the SPR in place, we were importing lots and lots of oil, and oil production in the United States was going down. Today, we're increasing our production. Oil imports are going down. Refined product exports are going up. Would it be current law precludes the president from using the Strategic Petroleum Reserve except in times of national emergency? He has some discretion in declaring that emergency, and Congress has had issues with past presidents when they've declared it. What is your opinion of giving the President or the Secretary of Energy the discretion to perhaps actually make, I won't say routine sales of crude oil, but make it easier to sell crude oil in the world market when there is not a national emergency, given the fact our oil production is increasing like it is, and we have the potential, I'm not saying we'll ever do it, but we have the potential to be totally energy independent and not import any crude oil at all.
Right. Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. So the authorities to export crude to other countries would fall into the purview of the Department of Commerce and of the Office of the President. So I'll demur from answering on their behalf. What I can say is that we think it's extremely positive that we are, for the first time in decades, producing more oil domestically than we have to import from other countries. That's been I think a tremendous improvement in terms of our energy security and economic development. I would note that we're still importing 7.6 million barrels per day. So we still are importing significant quantities of oil here in the present time. But in terms of the authorities to export, I mean, that would be a question for Congress. I mean, we follow the statute, and that there are exceptions and waivers that would be handled by the Department of Commerce and by the Office of the President.
Well, my time's expired, but it's refreshing to know that at least the Department of Energy wants to do what the Congress tells it to do.
Yeah, we're excited to hear about
I'm
that.
honored to hear that. With that, I yield back.
Where's Mr. Pallone? Oh, Chair, at this time, I recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Assistant Secretary Smith, in your testimony, you indicated that DOE has started a review of the SPR, and you mentioned a few of the issues that DOE will examine, including the size, the composition, and the geographic location of the reserve. It sounds as if the review assumes we would largely keep the present overall structure in place with perhaps some modifications. And maybe that's what we should do, but is the Department also going to reevaluate whether maintaining a strategic petroleum reserve is the best way to promote energy security? And might I just say, I don't doubt the need for emergency planning and specific authorities for action in case of an emergency, given the importance of this resource to our economy. But with the changes in our oil markets and private investment in infrastructure for oil and gas, and the changes in demand for different refined products, I'm wondering whether the SPR, which we conceived in the midst of a very different environment, is still the proper overall structure. So can you address whether or not we're going to reevaluate whether we maintain that SPR?
Well, thank you, Congressman, for that question. So if you look at global oil prices right now, you see markets are currently very well supplied, and as was noted by Congressman Barton from Texas, we're producing more oil domestically than we have in the past. We're producing more barrels domestically than we import from other countries. So some of those situations have changed. However, we do believe that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve does still provide a critical element of energy security for our nation. It's the largest energy stockpile in the world. It's, I think, an important tool that we have to handle not only disruption of physical barrels, but also the impacts that the price increases might have on the U.S. economy. So in our study, we will look at the size of the SPRO. I mean, I think that's important to consider what the appropriate size of Strategic Petroleum Reserve would be. And we will look at infrastructure issues. We'll look at, fundamentally how the Strategic Petroleum Reserve operates. But I would say that it's, it's certainly our conclusion and my personal conclusion as the official who oversees the site that this is an important resource for national security, and we think that its mission, its core mission remains vital.
And in terms of its structure, you believe it's the best, it will best serve us in the event of an emergency?
Well, Congressman, that's something that we'll evaluate in the study. I mean, there are structural issues that we can tackle in terms of what infrastructure needs to be in place. We have made changes in terms of, for example, setting up the Northeast Gasoline Reserve last year as a response to weaknesses that we saw in the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy in 2012. So there are steps that we're taking to say, well, we understand what the statute says, we understand what EPCA says, and we understand the design of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We're making steps as we go forward to ensure that we're using the authorities that we have to ensure that the reserve remains relevant. And we'll try to think broadly in terms of doing our strategic review, so that we consider what other changes might be appropriate.
Thank you for that. And you also recommend that Congress update the definition of a severe energy supply interruption to include criteria focused on disruptions in the global oil market, whether those disruptions result in a problem with U.S. oil imports or not. Would you elaborate on that thinking, please?
Well, this is it's tied to I guess, an observation that's already been made. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve was created back in the 70s in a very, very different environment than the environment that we have now. We operate under EPCA, and over the years, over the decades since the early 70s, the legislation, the statute that we have now is a patchwork of changes and addendums and amendments that have been put in place over the years. So there are some ambiguities about authorities. There are some issues of regional resources perhaps being deployed in a way that's more appropriate for a national resource. And so it's our view that as we look at the language that authorizes us to use the reserve, given that that's been changed piecemeal, bit by bit over decades, starting from a point which is very structurally different than the global markets right now, we do think it would be judicious and appropriate to take a look at the all of the language that gives authorization and streamline that and make it suitable for today's markets.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'll yield back. Mr. Chair.
Mr.
Chair, I'm sorry, Mr. Rush.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to the committee and all the guests here to recognize there's a gentleman in the room on the left side there with white hair, very handsome gentleman. That's former member Dave McCurdy from Oklahoma. He's the president of the American Gas Association, and I just didn't want him to sit in this room without us giving him his due. He was a fine gentleman and a true friend and just an outstanding member of Congress. So he's there. The handsome guy with the white hair.
And we know he was an outstanding baseball player as well for the Democrats.
I don't know why. Is there a provision that he can join your side and be on your team?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're going to need him, isn't it?
He looks like he's getting younger to me every single day. No, we're glad you're here. Thank you so much, and thank you for reminding us of that. This time, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair, and good morning, welcome, Mr. Smith. I know you're a fellow Texan, grew up in Fort Worth. You served our country, West Point graduate, in the Army. Thank you for your service. I promise I won't talk about the state of affairs between your Army and my Navy in that big football game that happens every year. But I do want to talk about the state of affairs of the SPR. It's a big part of my home life. The Bryan Mound is about 20 miles down the road from my home, and the Big Hill is about an hour east in Winnie. In your QER, DOE talks about some big changes for the SPR. You want billions of dollars or more spending to fix the system. And as it has been mentioned, our world's been turned upside down these past years with this energy production. We have plenty of crude here in parts of the country where we usually have to export, anticipate a shortage. I'd like to delve into some of those issues, but I first have a question on the specific type of crude in the SPR. These days, we're barely exporting light crude. Much of the crude we do import, importing light crude. Much of the crude we do import is heavier. It seems that this crude is most at threat of a supply disruption. And with the huge amount of oil we have here at home, are you happy with the current balance of light versus heavier crudes in the SPR? As you mentioned, I think the balance is between 260 billion barrels of light crude, sweet crude, and then 430 barrels of sour, heavier crude. Are you happy with that balance, and how would you adjust if you're not happy with it?
Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. So, indeed, our balance between sweet and sour is 260 for sweet barrels and then 430 for sour. As we go through our process of looking at our long-term strategic review, I think that is something that we'll be considering along with infrastructure. There are issues of cavern storage and how we blend different types of crudes and what caverns we would place them into. So, as you note, the mix of crude that refiners are using in the Gulf of Mexico has changed over the years. Late 90s, early 2000s, refiners put lots of money into upgrading refineries to run heavier crudes. Now we're seeing that there's a lot more, there are more light crudes that are becoming available here as the Bakken and South Texas comes online. These are all things I think that we have to consider. I wouldn't categorically state that right now we think we have the right balance. In fact, the very reason why this committee is encouraging us to the study and that we've already embarked on that path is that we think that we need to address these issues. We think they're very important.
Thank you. This is not news, but our crude supplies, and even the direction of some pipelines have changed in recent years. For refined products, we're a major global supplier now, and at the same time, some allies remain very reliant on imports. In some scenarios, an SPR release might not be as effective as it was in the past. My question is this: with this new market reality, should we be focused on the SPR here at home and making sure our allies upgrade their reserves overseas, allies like South Korea we served during the Army? Anything we should do with our allies to make sure they have their own SPRs?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congressman.
I'll take the promotion.
Okay. Apologies to the chairman.
Big apology.
So I just 2 weeks ago, so we work very closely with the IEA, the International Energy Agency, that helps us align petroleum reserves throughout the world. I'll make a couple of notes on that. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in Sichuan Province, Chengdu, China, at an IEA event, and then a few days later, I was in New Delhi, India, at a separate IEA event. We've also spent time in China looking at, creating a stronger communication between ourselves and the officials in China who manage their reserves. So we have a very strong understanding that we can't do this by ourselves. We wouldn't endeavor to do it by ourselves. I think it's much a more powerful. It's a more powerful tool when we're part of the potential to use the Strategic Petroleum Reserve as part of a collection of action. So indeed, we're taking steps along those lines. We think these are important steps to take. And in fact, we've just last year signed a historic agreement with China to create a greater sense of transparency between ourselves and China, so that we understand issues there with regard to their energy stockpiling. We think these are important steps, and the ones that we continue to push on.
Thank you. Out of time.
Chair recognizes at this time Mr. Doyle of Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, thank you for testifying before our committee today. We all know how much the landscape has changed since the 1975 when we first passed the legislation to create the SPRO. And I was glad that you mentioned the recently released QER in your testimony. It suggests that energy security should be more broadly defined than just oil security. What other sources do you think should be included, and how should we protect them?
So to make sure I understand the question, Congressman, so it's I've spoken to recommendations in the QER that had to deal with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and you're saying how do we think about energy security more broadly?
Yeah, the report suggested that we shouldn't think of it as just oil security, but we should think of it more broadly. Right. So is it suggesting security measures, or how we view other sources, natural gas or whatever?
Well, with regard to the petroleum reserve, the scope of the study that we've discussed here would be specific to the petroleum reserve, including crude and products, refined products. So that the scope of that discussion wouldn't change. What I will say is that we do work very closely across offices within the Department of Energy. So there's 4 applied offices within DOE. I run the Office of Fossil Energy, which includes oil, natural gas, clean coal, carbon capture and sequestration, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. There's a separate office that looks at energy efficiency and renewable energy. Right. A separate office that looks at Office of Electricity, and a separate office that looks at nuclear energy. So we do work very closely. In fact, one of the things that Secretary Moniz has integrated since he's come to the department are cross-cutting teams to ensure that in our budgeting process, we're very explicitly creating teams that break down those silos. So when we're thinking about energy security, when we're thinking about job creation, when we're thinking about all the important things about energy reliability and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, that we are breaking down those silos and we're thinking across borders. So that's something that's already in place, and we think is being expressed in the way that we're putting together our budgets and executing our programs.
Thank you. In your testimony, you also highlighted the QER's recommendation to consolidate the authority for the Northeast Home Heating Fuel Reserve and the Northeast Gasoline Supply Reserve into a single unified authority. And additionally, you suggested that these release authorities should be aligned and tailored to the purposes of a product reserve rather than that of a crude oil reserve. Can you expand upon why you think this consolidation is beneficial and how the release authority would be different for a product reserve rather than a crude oil reserve?
Well, thank you, Congressman, for that question. So, Part B, Title I of EPCA dictates the steps we would have to take in order for relief from the from the Northeast Gasoline Reserve, which is part of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That language is very much geared towards a national shortage and very much geared towards crude oil. It's not geared towards a regional event, the type of event that we saw in the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy, and it's not geared towards the needs of communities who are suffering shortfalls or shortages in supply of products. So we think it would be appropriate to amend that so that the triggers for releasing the gasoline reserve would be appropriate for the types of emergencies you might see there. So that, you know, we bought this insurance policy against shortages. We want to make sure that we're able to deploy that insurance policies in ways that are appropriate for the types of emergencies that it's meant to cover. With the NEHOR, the Northeast Home Heating Oil Reserve, there's a couple of triggers that might trigger the use of NEHOR. One is that a differential in the current price that it had to exceed a moving average by 60%. We think that's a tremendously difficult bar to make, and in fact, once you've gotten to that point, you've probably gone beyond the point in which the reserve would be useful. There's also language that says a regional supply shortage of significant scope and duration would trigger the ability to use NEHOR, which we think is probably a bit more appropriate. But between the NEHOR, the Northeast Home Heating Oil Reserve, the crude reserve, national resource in the Gulf of Mexico, the SPR, and the Northeast Gasoline Reserve, and any future thing that we might have for products, we do think that we need to go back and, again, as we mentioned, this patchwork of legislation that's been created over the years, we think it would be appropriate to look at all of that and make sure that it's streamlined for the economies and markets of today, as opposed to the markets of yesterday.
Great. Thank you very much. I yield back.
This time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, for 5 minutes.
Well, I thank the chairman, and I thank you for having this hearing today, and I appreciate our witness and his testimony this morning. And if I could just kind of go back to a question that the chairman asked initially, and then I think that part of the answer was dealing with on the infrastructure side. Did I understand you said something about the direction of the pipeline? Did I understand you to say that?
Yes, Congressman. So as we've created a lot more crude, so we mentioned that we're producing more crude domestically than we import, and that's for the first time in many years. We have a lot more crude that's coming from North Dakota, so it's coming from north down south. We have a lot more crude that's being produced in South Texas out of the Eagle Ford Shale. And so previously you had pipeline networks that you had the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in the Gulf of Mexico, and you could push oil from the Spro in the Gulf of Mexico up to the rest of the country. Now you're seeing some of those pipelines have reversed because they're bringing crude from new sources of production in North Dakota and in Texas, and it's coming into the Gulf of Mexico. And so that complicates the original construct of the Spro, which was to have this centrally located large stockpile of hundreds of millions of barrels that you could simply through pipelines push out to the rest of the country. Given that some of those pipelines are reversed, it makes us rethink some of those things, and also makes the waterborne transport of crude a lot more important than it probably was back in the 70s.
Now, when you look at your strategic overall plan that you're looking at into the future, now is that something that you're really going to emphasize then on the direction?
Indeed, Congressman. I mean, when we think about what infrastructure you need, what marine transport you need, what pipeline systems you might be employing, what should be the balance of crude, what should be the size of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, what types of crude the refiners are using. Those are all factors that we'll be considering when we undergo this comprehensive review, and it'll help us crystallize these issues and make very specific recommendations about investments that we need to make sure that we've got the reserve that's suitable for the markets of today as opposed to the markets of the early 70s.
Thank you, because also you had mentioned earlier in your responses that we have about 7.6 million barrels of oil that we're importing every day today. And also we all know, and it's been alluded to this morning, that what's happened with our shale development in this country and really what we've been able to do in this country to help ourselves. But in light of all that, just if something would happen on it, if there would be an international supply disruption at this time, are we prepared to meet that with the current setup of what we are with the SPR?
Well, so thanks for the question, Congressman. So we've noted many of the shortcomings. The market's changed. Some of the pipelines go in different directions. But one thing I can say is that not only through the test sale, but through the release that we had for the disruptions that came from the unrest in Libya, that the team of professionals we have running the Strategic Petroleum Reserve down in the Gulf of Mexico and Texas and Louisiana have always been successful at pushing oil into the markets and doing the things that this SPRO is meant to do. Now, that's not to say that going forward we don't have some concerns. We do think that there's some modernization that needs to occur. We do have some deferred maintenance that we're concerned about. And we want to make sure that mission readiness continues. But we are focused on remaining ready. We utilize the resources that we have in our disposal. But going forward, we do have some serious concerns, which is the reason why we've asked for some increase in budgets in this congressional justification for the 2016 budget, and that the study that we're going to be undertaking will be looking at issues of modernization. We think those are important points.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
This time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Undersecretary, Assistant Secretary, for testifying this morning and for your work in this area and for all the fossil fuel work that you do. Now, one thing you mentioned in your opening remark was the aging drawdown infrastructure, by saying that it needs more maintenance every year. What specifically would be the best actions to take? How much would they cost, and could that be paid for by drawdown profits?
So I'll talk a bit about the first part of the question, which is, what do we think needs to be done, and then try to address the second part of your question. So there's, in terms of deferred maintenance, I think there, every year we get an appropriation, we take that appropriation, we do what we need to do in order to remain mission ready. And, mission readiness is, this is a energy security asset, and so the team in the Gulf of Mexico is focused on mission readiness. So what we need to do in the immediate term for the budget that we're requesting for 2016? There are issues with valves, there are issues with compressors, there are issues with pumps. There's some wellbore workovers that need to be accomplished. We've included funding in our request for the metering, transfer metering skid at Big Hill, which would allow them to push oil in two different directions to two different buyers at the same time, as opposed to the one bottleneck that they have currently, where they can only move oil to one buyer. We think in the immediate term that these are important things to undertake in terms of ensuring that we're taking care of that deferred maintenance and we're ready, that we continue to be ready. Going forward, we have a modernization effort that's referred to in the quadrennial energy review. That would have to deal with further surface infrastructure for life extension. So, again, this was an asset that was put in place, decades ago. If you're going to move to decades into the future, there are lots of things you have to do to make sure that equipment that's getting to its sell-by date is getting renovated, it's getting fixed, it's getting replaced in some cases. So that would be surface infrastructure, everything we need to move oil around the surface, and that's the pumps and valves and all that equipment to move oil around. It would include brine disposal caverns. So we use brine to push oil in and out of the caverns, and so there would probably be some new brine drive caverns that we'd have to work on. And then disposal wells as well. So brine has to be disposed of when it's utilized, and so those are things that would be included in the life extension. Beyond that, there are some other issues to deal with: marine capacity, marine distribution, that's also envisioned in the quadrennial energy review, and will be considered in the strategic study that we'll be undertaking.
Okay. Well, last year it said you grossed $468 million by your test sale. What was the average price per barrel in that sale?
Congressman, I don't know that number off the top of my head. I'd be happy to respond for the record. It was consistent with whatever the market price was at the time. It was higher than it is today.
Higher than today, but is it higher than it was when the oil was purchased and put into the reserve?
Well, the oil is purchased over time, right? So the comparison I can make is that when we sold the oil back in when we did the test sale, we sold 5 million barrels. Receipts from that sale were somewhere in the order of magnitude of $500 million. We took part of those funds and use them to create the Northeast gasoline reserve, which is 1 million barrels of gasoline that we have in 3 sites in the Northeast. And that was the reserve that we created to respond to Superstorm Sandy. We had enough left over after that to replace almost all of the oil that we had sold in the first place. So we sold at a much higher level than we bought back, which means we sold the oil. We went and created a new reserve, including all the storage and paying for the maintenance and operation going forward on a go-forward basis, and still had enough left to buy back all the oil that we sold in the first place. So it was good timing and good execution on
well, that sort of answers the second part of my first question that you didn't answer the first time through. Okay, so with that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. This time recognize the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Let me get the first question out of the way as quickly. I want to hear from you whether or not you support what Secretary Moniz came and testified to us back in January, I believe it was, that the operation of the Nettle facilities at Morgantown and Pittsburgh will remain as is into the future. In fact, we talked about a 10-year time period. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't need to go to part 2 question on that. So the other issue is building back off the question having to do with the gasoline storage in the Northeast. I'm just curious about that because I know the crude can be stored for some period of time, but there's a shelf life for gasoline. Can you share with us a little bit about how often you're turning that over, because that gasoline can't stay there forever?
All right. Well, thank you, Congressman, for that question. So we didn't go and construct new tankage. We rented tankage that's in place, and so these are in existing commercial facilities. So part of our maintenance that we're paying for over time includes an ongoing turnover of that product.
So it's being refreshed, is what you're saying?
Yes, Congressman.
Okay, that's fine. So we don't have that issue, because I know there are a whole series of problems with gasoline over a period of time if it's not turned over. So let me go to the next question that has to do with this storage of the crude in the salt mines, primarily down, I guess, in the Gulf region. Is that where, having faced a lot of the pushback, and understandable, the pushback of the brine discharge from the operation in the Marcellus and the Utica operation, the environmentalists, and understandably, I would share with us the concern of what are we doing with this brine reserve that's coming back up again. So I'm curious, since you've produced somewhere in the neighborhood of close to 700 million barrels of brine, what'd you do with it?
So thank you for that question. So we've got a very experienced team of environmental professionals that are part of Strategic Petroleum Reserve that ensure that we're complying with all state and local and federal regulations in terms of disposal of brine. We do have brine drive caverns in place that we use to manage the brine. We need the brine to push the oil out of the caverns.
So when it comes back up, you're putting it someplace. That's what I'm trying. I want to say mechanically. I want to be able to be clear, not talking in 30,000 feet. When it comes back out, where does it go?
It probably would be good to answer that question for the record, Congressman, because I want to make sure that we get all the details correct. But what I can say is that that's an operation that we've got decades of experience managing, that we're managing consistent with all the state and local regulations.
How do you deal with it? Apparently there's some issues with in the salt mines with structural integrity that's breaking down in some cases. Right. And obviously, as you know, crude is not typically found in a salt environment. So you're going to have some interaction between the chemical composition of a crude oil and the salt in the walls of the container. How does this work in the breakdown? Right. What are we doing to assure us that we have long-term stability in our storage with our reserves?
Well, we do have an extensive testing program that's looking at sampling from a statistical sample of the caverns on an ongoing basis. So we have a very granular and fine understanding of the quality and the state of the crude that we have in all of the caverns. Generally, the reason why you store crude in these salt caverns is the salt is not soluble in crude, whereas it is soluble in water, right? So you use the water to actually create the space in the cavern, and then you fill that with crude. So you've got essentially these enormously large pressure vessels that are full of crude, but the salt itself is not soluble in crude, which is what makes it very appropriate for storage.
So you're indicating there's no chemical interaction between the two?
What I'm saying is that
careful with that.
I'm saying that the crude, the salt is generally not soluble in crude, and that we have an extensive testing program so that we have a very fine understanding of the state of the crude, sweet and sour, all the various caverns, 60 caverns throughout 4 different sites, so that on an ongoing basis we always understand exactly what crude we have in the caverns. We know what refineries they're suitable for, and that we're consistent with all the standards for delivering those refineries, both.
In the time frame that I have left on it is that apparently, as I said earlier, we're finding some developing structural integrity problems with some of those. Can you give us a sense of how many of those, if we're storing close to 700 million barrels in the crude, how much of that is in areas that are questionable?
Well, what I can say is that every cavern that we have crude in right now is certified, it's understood, it's safe. All right. We've had to decommission a couple caverns over the last few years. Our biggest challenge is that you're drilling through cap rock into these salt structures, and that over time they do move. So they pinch the well bores, they compress the well bores, they deform the well bores. And so on an ongoing basis, we've got a program of remediation where we're having to inspect the well bores on an ongoing basis. And part of the funds that we had requested for this budget period, increasing funding from last year to this year, was to ensure that we're able to do the appropriate number of workovers. One final thing I'll say is that if there's an issue of safety in any cavern, it means that we don't operate that cavern. So we don't operate any cavern that's going to create an environmental issue. We don't operate any cavern that's going to be create a safety issue. So we decommission those caverns if they create.
Okay, if you could get back to me on my time, I'm over on time. If you just get back to me on those 2 answers that left, one was percent and the other question.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you very much.
This time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, thank you. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve has been with us for a while and can perform a number of very useful functions, including taking some of the pressure off the spike in gas prices when consumers are getting hammered. In fact, we passed a law that I was one of the co-sponsors of to suspend shipments. This is back in 2008. Suspend shipments to the SPR because gas was $3.73 a gallon. And in fact, the evidence indicated that it was about adding about a quarter of a cost, a quarter a gallon at the price of the pump. Obviously, we're in a different situation now, and as we've refilled it, we're paying less than we were paying then. What's been the experience of SPR with respect to how it can have an impact on the price that consumers pay at the pump? I know that's not its primary objective, but it's an incidental effect.
Thank you, Cosman, for that question. So I guess two separate issues. So one of the things that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, just its existence, but also its utilization in a crisis, can do is have an impact not only on ensuring that we have appropriate supply in the disruption, but also on global oil markets. I will note that global oil markets and global crude markets are different. You do have you do have a internationally fungible global crude market and an internationally fungible global product market. We import and export product. In fact, we're net exporter of product of refined products. So if the question is, when we are filling the caverns, do we have an impact on prices? We just bought 5 million barrels, to replace the valves from the test sale, and we kept an eye on that as we made that announcement, and we didn't see an appreciable impact on prices. We are concerned about impacts on consumers, so it's something that we keep an eye on.
One other question. The Quadrennial Energy Review mentions that Congress should update the SPR release authorities to allow it to be used more effectively to prevent economic harm in emergencies. Do you recommend any specific legislative steps that are needed in order to accomplish that?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. So indeed, one of the disconnects we have, well, first of all, to reiterate a point that I had an opportunity to make earlier, we operate primarily under EPCA, which is right now, after decades, is a patchwork of amendments and addendums and changes. So we do see a disconnect between the market of today and the market that was perhaps foreseen back in the early 70s. So changes in the legislation and authorities that would allow us to be more proactive in using the Strategic Petroleum Reserve would be welcome. Changes that would centralize some of the authorities, so that right now we've got different authorities for regional product reserves and the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And importantly, there in some cases, for example, the Northeast Gasoline Reserve is managed under Title B, Section 1, and that is a national standard. So you have a regional reserve for products that would be released based on a standard that's set for a national reserve that has crude in it. And so we think that addressing all those issues would be positive to make sure that the assets effective.
Well, we'd welcome your specific recommendations on how best to do that.
Okay, I really look forward to the opportunity to work with the committee on that.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Assistant Secretary Smith, thank you so much for being here with us today. A couple of quick questions on a little bit of a different subject, then I'll get back to some questions about the QER. Are you confident that your department is treating applications by Canadian LNG companies consistently with NAFTA obligations?
Thank you very much for that question, Congressman. So we currently have two Canadian applicants before the department for authorization to export liquefied natural gas. To be clear, what we authorize is we give the applicant the authorization, or we rule on their application to export the molecule. Other entities look at environmental issues, including the FERC. So we've got two applications that are before us right now. So the commitment that we've made is that we're going to treat applicants in Canada, applicants in Mexico, and applicants in the United States in a way that's open, it's transparent, it's fair, it's consistent. So there's under the Natural Gas Act, Section 3 of the Natural Gas Act, we're compelled to make a public interest determination for any natural gas that's exported from the United States. It's our reading of that statute that applies to natural gas that might be exported via Canada, via Mexico, or via the United States. So whether you're a mile north or a mile south of that border, we have to do that public interest determination.
I understand that, but I guess I'm a little confused because it's my understanding that that's not being applied in the case of Mexico, but it is being applied in Canada. And are you concerned that Canada could, in fact, exercise jurisdiction over the export of LNG derived from Canadian natural gas for U.S. projects such as Jordan Cove and Oregon LNG? And the reason that I ask this question is because they're experiencing the same slow-rolling, slow-moving process for liquid natural gas export permits that American companies are. Right. It's going to come to a head at some point.
Well, I won't speculate on what the Canadian government's going to do. I think the Canadian government's going to do what's appropriate for the citizens of Canada, just as we're doing what's appropriate for the citizens.
Yeah, but it could have dire implications for here at home, because a lot of the gas that we have here at home in the Marcellus and other places are destined to go to places like Canada, and so it does have economic implications here at home.
Well, indeed, Congressman, and as we make these public interest determinations, well, first, I wouldn't concur with the characterization of this process slow rolling. I mean, we've already.
Yeah, well, we can debate that, because I mean they've been sitting there for years, you know, and there are 38, only 5 of them have been addressed. We were assured by Secretary Moniz that it was going to be that these were going to be looked at more quickly, and we're not seeing LNG export permits being granted.
Well, indeed, Congressman, we are. Right? We've authorized 5.7 billion cubic feet of natural gas already.
How many permits have you authorized?
For four different terminals.
4 out of 38. That's in Mr. Smith. In my view, that's slow rolling when America's economy is dependent upon the jobs and the energy independence that this brings.
Well, Congressman, right now there are 0 applicants sitting in front of us for a decision right now. There is an important process that these companies have to go through that.
Well, you know why that is, right? I mean, you know why that is. They're not going to put the hundreds of millions of dollars into doing the environmental assessments in the FERC process when they know these permits are going to sit in the Department of Energy for extenuating periods of time. They've got to have some idea that they're going to get a return on their investment. But
Congressman, in fact, they are spending the millions of dollars to go through those processes because they are going through that FERC process. So we work very closely with FERC. As those applicants have finished that process, then they come to the Department of Energy. The last application that we got that came out of FERC, we turned that around in 1 day. So as the companies will make the decision to either spend the money on the environmental work or not. And that's up to the companies. I mean, the market will decide that. As the companies make those investments, as they get financing, as they sell the gas, they will then come to the department. Once that work is done, it puts us in a situation where we can make that decision.
My time has expired almost. Point of clarification then. Are you telling me that the roughly 33 permitting applications that are sitting in the Department of Energy, that none of that has gone through the FERC process and that none of that is waiting on the Department of Energy for action?
Those applicants that have gone through FERC, that have completed the rehearing process, have come to us, and we've made decisions on those applicants.
So you're saying that none of those other 33 are waiting on the Department of Energy?
The rest of those 33 are doing all the other work that they have to do to complete these decadal, multi-billion-dollar projects. They're big projects, and they do take some time. But we are moving expeditiously on this. We're getting these applications out. As we are ready to make the decisions because they've done the work, they come to us and we write the orders.
Sorry for exceeding my time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
This time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. New York and the northeast region of the U.S. are particularly vulnerable to gasoline disruptions as a result of hurricanes and other natural events. And Hurricane Sandy, or Superstorm Sandy, in 2012 was a good example of that. It caused widespread issues related to the availability of gasoline. In response, to help build a more secure and resilient energy infrastructure, the Energy Department did establish the first federal regional refined petroleum product reserve containing gasoline. The reserve, I'm told, currently holds 1 million barrels of gasoline to help strengthen regional fuel resiliency in the Northeast. So let me ask you if you could please talk about efforts related to the setup and operation of the Northeast Reserve. Did you have to overcome any unforeseen challenges, and are there any issues that have yet to be resolved?
Thank you, Congressman, very much for that question. So, as you pointed out, the establishment of the Northeast Gasoline Reserve was an important step that we took after some of the disruptions that we noted in Superstorm Sandy. So as a result of that, we created a reserve in the Northeast that would have gasoline in place. That includes 700,000 barrels that are stored in the New York Harbor area, and that's in 2 separate facilities. We have 200,000 barrels that are in a terminal in Massachusetts, and then 100,000 barrels that are stored at terminals in South Portland, Maine. So those 3 different geographic locations make up the Northeast Petroleum Reserve. The funding that we used for purchasing the gasoline, we also used to procure storage capacity and maintenance and ongoing expenses for the reserve. So those resources are in place. We've put in place all the IT and the procedural systems that we would need to have in place in order to actually move those barrels out into the market in the case of a disruption. We work very closely with potential buyers of gasoline out of those reserves, so to ensure that we are on an ongoing basis exercising the capabilities to make sure that not only we purchase this insurance policy, but we're ready to use it and to deploy it in case of a future emergency. So that's the steps that we've taken to date.
So it's also my understanding that the DOE operates a network of pipelines as part of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, including the Northeast Reserve. So I'd like to know a bit more about that. Do you have available information on how many miles of pipelines does DOE operate as part of the SPRO?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, Congressman, but I'd be happy to take that question.
Get that to me. How is that system managed? Can you help me understand a little more about management of that system?
So the Strategic Petroleum Reserves, our Deputy Assistant Secretary, Mr. Bob Corbin, is based here in Washington, D.C., works very closely with me. We have the management office down in the Gulf of Mexico that has a center in New Orleans that oversees those operations. And so between that operational center in New Orleans and our center here in Washington, D.C., we oversee all the activities of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, including the Northeast Home Heating Oil Reserve and the newly created Northeast Gasoline Reserve is all managed by the SPRO.
Is the safety of that pipeline network subject to oversight by DOT's Office of Pipeline Safety?
So one clarification I'll make is that there's not an extensive pipeline network that is actually owned and maintained by the SPRO. Again, I'll be happy to give some details of that question for the record to ensure that we're being clear on that. But we certainly are complying with all state and federal regulations for all assets that we manage.
But help me to understand who is responsible for regulating those pipes.
Well, so if the Strategic Petroleum Reserve has a release that goes into an existing commercial pipeline network, then that pipeline would be operated and regulated by whatever the appropriate federal and state statutes oversee that infrastructure. Just like if we put crude into a barge and we sell it to someone who's going to take that waterborne to another location, then there would be a federal and state and local regulations for those transportation assets, even if we don't own them.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This time I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, thank you for your testimony today. Going to the QER for a minute, the QER recommends that Congress authorize an additional $1.5 to $2 billion to increase the incremental distribution capacity of the SPR. That request hasn't appeared in front of Congress. Can you tell me why?
Well, thanks for the question, Congressman. So in our 2016 budget request, we did have some funds for maintenance issues within the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It did not include these recommendations from the QER, and indeed, as you note, the QER was just released, right? So we look forward to working with Congress to refine further details on that. But the QER literally is hot off the presses as of last Tuesday.
Okay, thank you. And the QER also says that the DOE will analyze the need for additional or expanded regional product reserves, in particular like the one you talked about in the Northeast. These will be in the Southeast and on the West Coast. Will the DOE formally request funding from Congress in advance in an annual budget submission?
Thank you, Congressman. So we're undergoing these studies now in real time. So I'll demur from making any specific predictions about when we'd make a recommendation, or even what the review will state. So the whole purpose of going through this comprehensive review, looking at everything from subsurface issues to market issues to infrastructure to need for regional reserves, will help us flesh out what needs to happen, and indeed future efforts certainly would have to have funds appropriated, and we'll be working with Congress based on the results of the study.
Okay, so we can assume that if the DOE study indicates that you should have these regional product reserves, then you will formally ask Congress for the appropriation.
Congressman, certainly if we do determine that there is new work that needs to be done that requires appropriation, that would require us to work with Congress.
Okay, good. Will you provide to the committee for the record the September 2011 DOE study that's entitled Refined Petroleum Product Reserve Assessment of Energy Security Needs, Cost and Benefits, that's referenced on page 2-34 of the QER?
We can provide that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have. I yield back.
Chairman yields back. At this time, recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, good to see you again, Assistant Secretary Smith. First of all, I'd like to talk to you about LNG permitting, exporting, but and thank you for coming last Congress to our Natural Gas Caucus to talk with us. Of course, the expansion of exporting of natural gas is important to our producers in our area, but also to our friends and allies around the world. But today we're talking about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is also important. In March 2014, Department of Energy conducted a test sale from the SPR to demonstrate drawdown and distribution capacity. In November, the DOE reported that pipeline capacity is limited and drawdown of significant scope may pose a challenge. The same issues were addressed in the Quadrennial Energy Review, and the budget was submitted for $51 million for operations and flexibility, and the QER recommends $1.5 to $2 billion increase in distribution capacity. Obviously, $51 million is relatively low compared to the $2 billion, and I'm going to see how we can get you some of those funds. Does the DOE anticipate using funds from additional test sales to fund requirements laid out in the QER? Do you have that ability?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. So we certainly don't have any. First of all, we don't have plans for a future test sale. The last test sale we felt was very important in order to exercise the operational and procedural capabilities of this borough, and so that's why we undertook that sale. We don't have plans for a future sale.
Okay, but does the department have the ability, if you have a sale, to utilize that funding for your budgetary needs? It may not be appropriated by the appropriations.
So under statute, we've got a fairly limited number of things that we could use those funds for. We could use them to buy other petroleum products. We could use it for storage or transit of petroleum. So there are some, but under statute, there are some limits to what we could use those funds for. But again, to reiterate, the test sale was driven by the need to exercise the operational capabilities of this borough.
And I'm glad you do it, because what you found out that there were some issues that need to be dealt with.
Indeed.
During an emergency, what actions or authorities are available to alleviate those issues you found out?
Some of the issues that we found out were drivers for the 2016 congressional justification for the budget that the President issued for the 2016 budget, including the additional metering skid at Big Hill. So in terms of major kind of infrastructure issues, I mean, that was probably one of the main things that we were already kind of moving to address, but obviously we need funding to do that.
Okay. Does the DOE support additional pipeline construction and tank storage to deal with the constraints that you found?
Congressman, I think that the specific answer to, what we would recommend to do next with regards to infrastructure will be driven by the strategic review. We do know that, as we noted, we've got aging infrastructure, and so the life extension program that we've thought through would include, some surface infrastructure thing, including tankage, including pipelines to move things around the SPRO, including pumps and compressors, brine drive caverns, brine disposal wells. So those would all be things that we'd have to put in place as part of the life extension. So we've got a rough outline of what we think that would look like, and you've seen some rough numbers in the QER. I think there was an estimate of between $700 and $900 million for that piece of work. The details of what that would look like, that's what we're going to be driving towards in this review that we're undertaking.
Okay. I know a significant part of the SPRO is actually just east of Houston, between Houston and Beaumont.
Indeed.
Was that where the test was done, or was it other locations that we have the reserve?
The test cell was out of Big Hill and Bryan Mound was where the crude came from those for that sale.
Okay, because I always joke that if we have infrastructure problems in Texas with oil and gas, then the rest of the country really must be in bad shape.
Oh.
Because we have a lot, and we still need to build more. Right. Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry to say, Mr. Smith, there are no more questions for you today. But we do appreciate your being with us and talking about this important issue. And I just wanted also to bring your attention that Mr. Rush and I and Mr. Pallone and Mr. Upton had sent a letter to Secretary Moniz sometime in March just asking some preliminary, about 4 or 5 questions about the SPR review process that you're undertaking now. And if you see him in the hall or at the coffee table, would you ask him if he could give us a reply? We'd appreciate it.
I will do that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, and thanks again for being with us. We look forward to working with you on this issue. And at this time, I'd like to call up the second panel of witnesses. And we'll have you all come up, and then what I'm going to do is just introduce each one of you before your 5-minute opening statement. So you all just have a seat, and then we'll get started. How do they know where to sit?
We have to get the name tags back up.
Oh.
Yeah, well, let's do it.
Or that's our end. All right, on this second part of this hearing, we're going to be focused on the energy efficiency aspect. And I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us this morning. And thank you also for your patience. And as I said, I'm going to introduce you individually, and then you'll make your opening statement. So our first witness this morning is Mr. Christopher Peel, who is the Corporate Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for Rheem Manufacturing Company on behalf of the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute. So, Mr. Peel, thank you. You're recognized for 5 minutes. Just be sure to turn the microphone on and get it up close enough, because sometimes it's difficult here in this room. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Rush, and members of this subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you to talk about some energy policy issues that are important to manufacturers and our customers. I would like to begin by thanking you for your work on the recent passage of S-535, which included language providing regulatory relief for grid-enabled water heaters that are positive for the environment and our customers in rural America. I would also like to thank you for inviting me to testify this morning. My name is Chris Peel. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Rayburn Manufacturing Company. Rayburn was founded in the 1920s, is headquartered in Atlanta, and is a global industry leader with 7 U.S.-based factories and distribution centers. Rayburn designs, manufactures furnaces, air conditioners, water heaters, and refrigeration equipment. We have a proud history of developing innovative, high-efficiency products which reduce energy consumption and help customers save on their utility costs. I'm here on behalf of AHRI, a trade association that represents 315 manufacturers of HVAC, refrigeration, and water heating equipment. AHRI's members employ over 100,000 people in the U.S. I'm here today because we care about serving our customers, enhancing safety and reliability, supporting our employees, and improving the environment. With these priorities in mind, I asked the subcommittee to help address 3 issues that are vitally important: transparency and stakeholder engagement in the rulemaking process, the expected impact of the DOE's proposed efficiency standards for residential furnaces, and the value provided by voluntary independent verification programs. The DOE is planning to issue 23 new regulations affecting our industry between now and 2018. This ambitious schedule has caused a reduction in the constructive interaction between stakeholders and DOE, resulting in oversights involving economic assumptions and technical issues. Rather than working together to achieve what are very common objectives, we find ourselves in a situation where we need to ask for congressional intervention. In my view, new efficiency standards achieve the greatest public benefit when industry, interested NGOs, and government officials work together to create consensus-driven standards. We also believe this is the goal envisioned by DOE's own process rule, which involves early input from stakeholders as a means to achieve successful regulations through the appropriate analysis and utilization of real-world inputs. The outcomes will be better balanced and achieve the intended benefits for the economy and the environment. The recently proposed residential gas furnace standard is an example of a rule created with insufficient input from industry. DOE is poised to finalize a new energy efficiency standard for residential furnaces that would raise the national minimum efficiency from 80 to 92%. To achieve the higher efficiencies of a 92% furnace, both the product and the installation become significantly more complex and costly for the consumer. DOE estimates that replacing an existing 80% furnace with a 92% furnace will cost the majority of consumers an average of $660 more. This could rise to $2,200 depending on the installation. Out of the more than 20 million 80% furnaces currently installed, the majority are in the South, where the customer payback will seldom be realized. Therefore, we recommend consideration of legislative efforts that would give time and space to finalize this rule until all stakeholders are able to work together to ensure the proposed regulations will achieve our efficiency objectives without needlessly penalizing families and small businesses. I also wish to thank Representatives Latta, Cooper, and Blackburn, who have introduced H.R. 1785, the Volunteer Verification Program Act, which will assure consumers that the HVAC and water heating products they install in their homes truly meet the applicable federal efficiency levels while conserving taxpayer resources and providing certainty for manufacturers. This is the proverbial win-win-win scenario, and I thank you and the staff for including this measure in the draft bill. Under H.R. 1785, DOE and stakeholders would work collaboratively on a negotiated rulemaking to establish criteria under which the federal government would certify independent programs and rely on such VIVPs to verify efficiency ratings. DOE would, of course, retain its enforcement authority to periodically inspect and test products to ensure compliance. As DOE budgets and priorities can fluctuate year to year, we believe that industry and our customers are best served by VIVPs. Our industry spends millions of dollars and thousands of employee hours every year to certify and verify that our efficiency ratings are accurate. VIVPs, such as AHRI's program, has for 50 years successfully held manufacturers accountable to the high standards that our customers deserve and expect. Finally, Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Rush, and members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the chance to appear this morning, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have and to working together with you and your staff on these priorities.
Thank you, Mr. Peel. And our next witness is Ms. Kateri Callahan, who's the president of the Alliance to Save Energy, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member and members of the subcommittee. I really appreciate the opportunity to testify today. The Alliance to Save Energy is a bipartisan nonprofit coalition of about 140 businesses and organizations that span the entire economy. Our sole mission is to advance energy efficiency, and we do this to drive economic growth, to preserve the environment, and to enhance our national security. We have a proud 38-year history of bipartisan leadership from House and Senate lawmakers who serve as honorary members of our board. And I'm delighted that of the 16 congressional leaders, we have 5 who are members of this committee, Congressman McKinley, Congressman Welch, Congressman Tonko, Congressman Burgess, and Congressman Kinzinger. These forward-thinking leaders demonstrate clearly that energy efficiency is truly the sweet spot in our debate, our national debate over energy policy. Since the founding of the Alliance, our country has made huge strides in driving energy efficiency into our economy, and a lot of this progress can be traced directly to the work of Congress over the past 4 decades. Since Congress began lawmaking on efficiency, we have actually doubled our country's energy productivity. That means that we're getting twice as much gross domestic product from each unit of energy that we consume as we did in the 1970s. And this translates into huge savings. ACEEE is announcing today that Americans just last year will save $800 billion on their collective energy bill. The policies now on the books are going to continue to deliver gains. The EIA estimates and forecasts that our energy productivity will increase 50% or more just on a business-as-usual case. But we believe that we can and must do better if we're going to remain globally competitive. And since we still waste about half of the energy that we consume, there's ample room for improvement. The Alliance has a goal to again double our energy productivity in this nation by 2030. And if we do this, we see that American families could see their utility bills fall by over $1,000 a year, and we could create 1.3 million new jobs. But we can only deliver these benefits to Americans if Congress provides a policy infrastructure to support aggressive energy efficiency implementation. We're very encouraged by action in the 114th Congress to date. We were thrilled that the first energy bill that went to the President and will be signed today is S-535, and we thank the Chairman and the members of the committee who worked so hard to move this bipartisan bill through the full House. We view S-535 as a strong indicator that the comprehensive energy legislation you're creating will include meaningful efficiency policies. And the draft title already does contain some of these policies, but like the ranking member, we are deeply concerned that some of the provisions will actually impede or roll back progress that we're making. So first, let me run through quickly those provisions that we support. We support all the provisions in Chapter 1, which deal with improving federal energy efficiency, with the exception of the repeal of the fossil fuel consumption requirements. We could support this repeal if it were coupled with strong efficiency goals, as it is in other legislation pending before the Congress. We also support the provisions in Chapter 2 that safeguard the integrity of the Energy Star program and require energy guide labels to include information on the smart grid capability of products. We support all the provisions included in Chapter 4, as these enable energy and water efficiency measures in federal buildings. And finally, we support Chapter 5, which enables schools to make efficiency upgrades. As much as we support these provisions, we have very, very strong objections to the provisions included in Chapter 3. Building energy codes are a critical policy tool for advancing energy efficiency in the largest consuming sector of our economy, and they've been very effective. As a result of the 38% improvement in the codes that we've seen in recent years, we've seen a reduction of $44 billion annually in the energy bills of American families. The Department of Energy has played a key and critical role in delivering improvements in the building energy codes, and we believe it's imperative that the Department continue to engage in every step of the code-making process, from development to adoption to implementation. The Alliance, therefore, urges the committee to strike the current provisions in Chapter 3 and to replace them with the Building Energy Code provisions that are contained in the newly reintroduced McKinley-Welch Energy Savings and Competitiveness Act. These provisions actually strengthen model building codes to make new homes and commercial buildings more energy efficient. And they also work with the states and the private sector to improve the transparency of the code writing process. The McKinley-Welch bill was carefully developed to address concerns of both advocates, builders, and code-making bodies. In addition, their bill deals with the upfront cost of efficiency by ensuring that the upgrades are valued in the appraisal and the mortgage underwriting process. The provision known as the SAVE Act enjoys the support not only of advocates like me, but also of the National Association of Realtors and the Chamber of Commerce and many, many others. So as the committee continues its work, we urge members to review the many bipartisan energy efficiency bills that are emerging or being reintroduced. And in particular, we ask the committee to consider not just the building energy provisions in the McKinley-Welch bill, but all of the provisions in that bill which have broad-based bipartisan support. So I commend the chair and the committee for seeking to include energy efficiency as a pillar of national energy policy. And we are hopeful that as the committee continues its work, the energy efficiency title will be made much more robust so we can achieve that goal, and we can offer, as the Alliance to Save Energy, our full-throated support. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Callahan. I was wondering why Congressman McKinley was asking us to pay particular attention to your testimony, but when you referred to him as a forward-thinking leader, I mean, I understand. And our next witness is Mr. John Somerhalder, who is the chairman and president and CEO of AGL Resources, and he's testifying on behalf of the American Gas Association. So you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Rush, and members of the committee. Again, I'm John Somerhalder, both the past chairman of AGA and chairman, president, and CEO of AGL Resources. I'm proud that my company serves many of the states represented on this committee, including New Jersey, Illinois, Virginia, Texas, Florida, California, and Maryland. We support the committee's discussion draft because it will remove inappropriate barriers to the use of clean, energy-efficient, cost-effective natural gas. Gas utilities have shared your focus around greater energy efficiency for a long time. 68 million residential gas consumers today use the same amount of gas that 38 million customers used in 1970. Every year, gas utilities spend about $1.5 billion on energy efficiency and help customers save 136 trillion BTUs of energy and reduce about 7.1 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. We are proud of what we do as a company as well. Since 2011, our AGL utilities have invested $188 million in energy efficiency programs. We've helped 45,000 customers purchase high-efficiency furnaces. We've helped save enough energy to natural gas to heat 80,000 homes for a year. And we've delivered the highest one-year energy savings by a gas-only utility in the U.S. history just last year. We support your efforts to find a common-sense standard for residential furnaces. Under DOE's own analysis, only a third of homeowners will be better off under its proposed rule, and about a third of low-income customers will be worse off. We think DOE's assumptions are also too rosy. They don't fully reflect the cost to consumers. Our data shows that an average customer would be forced to pay an additional $350 in the unit cost for the furnace and an additional $1,500 up to $2,200 for the installation of that unit. The Gas Technology Institute predicts that the proposed rule would impose an additional $44.9 million in energy costs and produce an additional 348,000 tons of CO2 per year. We cannot support an efficiency standard that imposes higher costs, requires more energy, and provides more emissions. Section 4124 of the discussion draft would require DOE to stop its rulemaking and start a negotiated rulemaking involving a broader group of stakeholders. As discussed, discussions between AGA and other stakeholders have shown over the past several months, there are alternatives that would meet our shared goals for energy savings and consumer benefits. The negotiated rulemaking process included in the discussion draft will help us reach that consensus. As you know, Section 4115 would repeal Section 430 of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, a provision that bans all fossil fuel-generated energy use in new and renovated federal buildings by the year 2030. The fossil fuel ban was passed when the government thought U.S. supplies were dwindling. It had good intentions, but DOE's own analysis shows the cost to taxpayers would jump from $30 million today to over $500 million in 2019 and over $1.1 billion in 2030, almost a 4,000% increase from today's cost. It simply is not practical. We also support a provision sponsored by Representatives Blackburn and Schrader, H.R. 1273. Model building energy codes are developed by private organizations. States and local governments choose to either adopt the new standards or to maintain their current standards. DOE has too often taken on an inappropriate advocacy role in code development. The provisions would introduce greater transparency in the Department of Energy's technical support of code development, specifically prohibiting DOE funding or personnel from involvement in any advocacy related to code adoption. Finally, Section 4142 clarifies that the term of a utility energy service contract can extend beyond 10 years, but not exceed 25 years, correcting the Department of Defense interpretation. A 10-year term severely limits utilities' ability to help the DoD reach its energy security, energy efficiency, and renewable energy goals. At AGL Resources, we understand the importance of these types of projects. Since 2003, we have worked on 10 projects totaling roughly $31 million in Georgia, Virginia, and Florida to provide these vital energy efficiency programs. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to questions from the committee.
Thank you very much. And our next witness is Mr. Frank Thompson, who is president of Sweetwater Builders, and he's testifying on behalf of the National Association of Home Builders. And you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Rush, members of the committee, I'm pleased to appear before you today on behalf of the 140,000 members of the National Association of Home Builders and to testify in support of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve Discussion Draft and Title IV on energy efficiency. My name is Frank Thompson. I'm a home builder from Western Pennsylvania. As a longtime leader in the drive to make new and existing homes more energy efficient while prioritizing housing affordability, NAHB is uniquely positioned to analyze the impact of this legislation on home building, remodeling, and rental housing industries. NAHB supports this discussion draft. Of importance to NAHB, this draft includes provisions from H.R. 1273, introduced by Representatives Blackburn and Schrader, that use model building energy codes to encourage meaningful energy savings for residential construction that are achievable and cost-effective. As a single-family home builder in Western Pennsylvania, I deal with energy codes, the baseline energy efficiency requirements for buildings every day, and I understand how different energy-efficient features impact the performance of a home. I also participate in the development of these codes because they so intimately affect the way I build. The earlier versions of these codes focused on consumers, helping them reduce their utility bills with affordable improvements to their home. Over the last few years, however, I have seen negative trends. First, while it does not write or publish the codes, the Department of Energy participates in the development of the codes by providing technical assistance, needed building science research, energy modeling, and analysis that only DOE can provide. But NAHB has concerns that technical assistance has been broadly interpreted to allow representatives from DOE to advocate for or against certain technologies, picking winners and losers and seeking aggressive and costly requirements. Another unfortunate trend in energy codes is the failure to consider the true economic costs when seeking further energy reductions. We know how valuable the energy savings are to the consumer, but even with these savings, there is a significant upfront investment. The 2012 version of the residential code had such significant cost increases that it would take the average family 13.3 years to recoup those costs through utility savings. Some parts of the country, including the entire state of Kentucky and parts of Illinois, saw payback periods in excess of 16 or 17 years. Meeting an energy code is a requirement for every single home, including low-income housing. Increasing housing costs for all home buyers will have the unintended consequence of reducing housing affordability. For every $1,000 increase in the price of a home, 246,000 households will be priced out of a mortgage. This proposed legislation will drastically improve the manner by which model building energy codes are developed by establishing guidelines for DOE that increase transparency and ensure an open and fair process. This legislation will also require any code supported by DOE to be cost-effective, allowing homeowners to recoup any investment in 10 years or less. NAHB strongly supports the discussion draft and urges the committee to swiftly pass this as legislation. NAHB would also like to weigh in on Section 4124 of this draft, which addresses a flawed DOE rule on non-weatherized gas furnaces included in any final legislation. This provision would require DOE to convene a representative advisory group of interested stakeholders to help analyze the impacts of the proposed rule and determine whether it's technically feasible and economically justified, and if not, participate in a negotiated rulemaking. I thank you for this opportunity and welcome your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. And at this time, our next witness is Elizabeth Knoll, who is an energy efficiency advocate for the Natural Resources Defense Council, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing. My name is Elizabeth Knoll. I'm an energy efficiency advocate at the Natural Resources Defense Council, here to share our views on national policies and programs that lead to increased investments in energy efficiency. What would you say if I told you today we can save Americans money, promote job growth, cut pollution with a solution that's affordable, easy to implement, proven effective, and what your constituents want? That solution is energy efficiency. And states across the country are seeing job growth, broad public support for energy efficiency. Take Illinois. 2/3 of clean energy jobs, clean energy workers are employed in energy efficiency. And a recent poll showed 70% of likely voters strongly support increased energy efficiency to meet the state's energy needs. In state after state, support for using efficiency to meet future energy needs is the same or higher. Pennsylvania, 97%, Virginia, 95%, Ohio, 94%, and Michigan, 92%. Meanwhile, federal programs like the Department of Energy's Appliance Efficiency Standards Program, first authorized by Congress in 1987, will save Americans $1.8 trillion on their utility bills through 2030. And just last year, those standards avoided more pollution as comes from nearly 500 million cars. Let me take a moment now to thank the committee for their leadership in helping pass the Energy Efficiency Improvement Act of 2015 just last week. It shows once again that efficiency has bipartisan support. And let's not forget that Ronald Reagan signed the first efficiency standard legislation almost 30 years ago. The bill now on the President's desk was a good start, but we must go further. Every American home, building, and appliance that we make more efficient saves money, cuts pollution, and moves our nation closer to a more sustainable and prosperous future. Some of the provisions before you today will bring energy savings to your constituents, and others will increase the federal government's leadership, leading to innovation in the private sector as well. However, I'd like to highlight 3 troubling provisions that we would strongly oppose, which are further detailed in my written testimony. First, Section 4124 would block the Department of Energy from finalizing a much-needed update to the efficiency standards for non-weatherized gas furnaces. If Congress blocks the standard, it will only hurt your constituents, especially moderate and low-income families struggling to pay their energy bills. As proposed in March, these standards would save the average consumer $600 over the life of the furnace. Renters, who are often low-income customers, especially benefit from minimum standards. Without an improved standard, property owners are likely to continue to buy cheaper, less efficient models, which means higher bills for those tenants. Congress needs to strengthen existing programs and policies, not delay or weaken them. Next, Section 4115 is counterproductive to cutting pollution in federal buildings. Phasing out fossil fuels has enormous potential to reduce pollution, and that's a place where the federal government can show leadership and leverage the enormous benefit of efficiency to reduce the $6 billion it spends on its own buildings. And finally, Section 4131 would hamstring the process for adopting model building energy codes that deliver valuable savings for homeowners and renters in your districts and across the nation. Smart federal policies are essential to achieving the energy efficiency progress that consumers want and America needs. And we know manufacturers will continue to innovate and rise to meet these efficiency standards while delivering the same or better performance and options as they've done. In closing, Congress should reject any proposal to delay, weaken, or repeal the clean energy programs that have proven effective, and instead continue passing meaningful energy policies that Americans want. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next witness is Ms. Rona Newmark, who's Vice President, Intelligent Efficiency Strategy at EMC Corporation, and she's testifying on behalf of the Information Technology Industry Council. And you're recognized for 5 minutes, Ms. Newmark.
Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Rush, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting the Information Technology Industry Council, also known as ITI, to testify today on the important issue of energy efficiency legislation, and specifically the Energy Efficient Government Technology Act. I am EMC Corporation's Vice President of Intelligent Energy Efficiency Strategy. EMC is a leading IT company providing products and services to enable customers to move to cloud computing and to gain value through analysis of big data, all within trusted computing environments. The company is headquartered in Massachusetts and supports a broad range of customers. At EMC, I'm charged with reviewing EMC's products and strategies in the areas of energy efficiency and energy efficiency standards. I also help lead efforts within the company and the industry to view efficiency at a system level, to provide the best net energy savings to accomplish particular results. As you know, ITI is the global voice of the technology sector. The 60 companies in ITI are leaders and innovators in information and communications technology, including hardware, software, and services. These companies, including my own, are committed to innovation, to developing the energy-efficient solutions demanded by our customers, and to helping drive sustainable economic growth and energy independence across our nation's economy. ITI has had a fruitful history of working with the committee on energy efficiency and productivity. Enactment of the Bipartisan Energy Efficient Government Technology Act, Sections 4111 and 4112 of the discussion draft, would be another important milestone in this regard. EGTA is not a regulatory approach. Rather, ITI believes the federal government can be a useful partner and leader in leveraging information and communications technology for increased energy efficiency and productivity, giving taxpayers improved ROI. Data centers and the Internet of Things will be essential to future U.S. sustainable growth. We're only beginning to learn what opportunities lie ahead for smarter buildings, smarter manufacturing, and smarter transportation systems, not to mention the smarter fill-in-the-blank we have yet to invent. EGTA recognizes this and emphasizes the right role for the federal government in encouraging further progress and innovation. ITI thanks Representatives Eshoo, Kinzinger, Welch, McKinley, and Tonko for introducing EGTA again this year. We also thank the committee for EGTA's inclusion within the discussion draft as Sections 4111 and 4112, and we strongly urge EGTA's adoption this year. Thank you. I look forward to answering your questions.
Ms. Newmark, thank you. And our next witness is Mr. Mark Wagner, who is Vice President and U.S. Government Relations for Johnson Controls, and he's going to be testifying on behalf of the Federal Performance Contracting Coalition, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Rush, and members of the committee. I'm Mark Wagner of Johnson Controls, and representing 10 energy service companies that form the Federal Performance Contracting Coalition. We work to help the federal government reduce energy consumption through energy-saving performance contracts, or ESPCs. I'd like to briefly discuss the benefits of ESPC and outline our coalition support for pending legislation that would improve the program. ESPCs are a tremendous tool for the federal government because agencies can get energy-efficient equipment such as new lighting, building controls, HVAC equipment, chillers, boilers, renewable energy assets, at no upfront cost to the government. The energy service companies leverage private sector capital to make the investment. We design and install the equipment and put in place a plan to measure and verify the savings. Three important parts of this deal. As you can see from the slide, first, the agency gets a facility upgrade with new building equipment, and they lower their energy consumption. Second, the agency pays off the investment with the savings on its utility bill, but never pays more than it was already paying for its utilities. Thirdly, then it realizes all the savings after the investment is paid off. Most importantly, the savings are guaranteed by the energy service company. Let me give you an example of an ESPC project that Johnson Controls is doing at Fort Bliss in Texas. We've installed building controls at 120 buildings, put in energy-efficient lighting, electric motors, chillers, building insulation, and a 4.7 megawatt photovoltaic array with 5,500 solar panels. It's a $100 million investment of private sector capital, which will save the installation $150 million. We're also working with Base on technology for a microgrid to improve energy security in the event of an adverse occurrence on the grid. This is just one example of the many ESPCs that provide multiple benefits to the federal government and to taxpayers. ESPCs are a well-established program. According to the Department of Energy, approximately 600 performance contracts worth $5.3 billion of investment have been awarded to 25 agencies in 49 states, with a net savings of $3 billion to the federal government. Let me now talk about several legislative provisions designed to improve the ESPC program. We've been very supportive of the energy savings through Public-Private Partnership Act of 2015 that was introduced by Representative Kinzinger and Welch. Thank you very much. This legislation will ensure that the federal agencies are utilizing to the fullest extent possible all cost-effective measures for energy conservation measures. It streamlines the ESPC statute, providing consistency and clarification, and it promotes transparency and accountability across the government. This is now Section 4141 of your bill. Specifically, it would require reporting on the progress of ESPCs. It would encourage agencies to act on their required audits. It would clarify that agencies cannot arbitrarily limit the terms and use of energy-related operation and maintenance savings. It would make the definition of federal buildings consistent with provisions in the law, and it would clarify other important provisions for ESPCs, such as the sale, transfer of energy incentives, rebates, or credits, as well as the type of projects for which ESPC can be used. These are all important details to update and clarify the existing statute, which will make ESPCs an even more powerful tool for the federal government. In addition, we support clarifying the use of ESPC for efficiency gains in data centers, which are extremely energy intensive. We're supportive of the repeal of the federal building fossil fuel reduction as long as it is packaged together with extended energy efficiency goals for the government, which currently expire at the end of this year. We're supportive of long-term utility energy service contracts as long as they include measurement and verification of energy savings, as well as guarantee or assurance of savings. Other important provisions that we hope the committee will consider. In ESA, Section 432, changing may to shall would ensure that the government would act on cost-effective savings. Extending energy efficiency goals for the federal government, which expire at the end of this year, as I mentioned. Ensure that agencies set ESPC goals on an annual basis and report on their progress. And add alternatively fueled vehicles and their infrastructure measures allowed under ESPCs. Finally, many of you are aware that the Congressional Budget Office scores any attempt to update the ESPC statute. Members of the Energy and Commerce Committee have tried to resolve this situation, and we are appreciative of that. The Senate budget contains a fix to the scoring problem for the Senate legislation. We encourage the House to continue to pursue annualized scoring for ESPC to fix this CBO scoring problem. Thank you for your support of ESPC and the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Thank all of you for your testimony. We appreciate it very much, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. As you know, we have this draft legislation, and we hear a lot in Congress today around the country about lack of bipartisanship. And this bill, there are 14 titles in the energy title of this bill, or 14 sections. And on 12 of those sections, we do have Democratic support. So the three areas that there is not agreement on relates to the furnaces, relates to the fossil fuel, and relates to the building codes. Now, if you have bipartisanship for 12 out of 14 titles, that's pretty good, I would say. So I want to address those three areas that there is some disagreement on. And I want to tell you why we put those in there. I think Mr. Thompson, Mr. Somerhalder, Mr. Peel all touched on it. But first, we'll focus a little bit on Mr. Thompson's remarks. DOE obviously has been a leader in recommending and promoting efficiency. And originally, they were really good at providing technical assistance. But many people around the country, I don't care where you live or what part of the country you live in, are saying, you know, they're becoming more of an advocate. They're getting closer to dictating and saying what will and will not be done. And one example of that was recently they came out with the standards on the hot water heaters that were being used in demand response programs by rural electric cooperatives around the country. And the cost would double under those standards. So Congress came together and delayed the implementation until some further refinements could take place that passed the House, passed the Senate, sent to the President. Now we're hearing the same thing about furnaces. And we all know that efficiency, I mean, we all know this, that, oh, you can promote good jobs because you promote industries to manufacture new products that are better. You save energy cost. You help improve the environment. But if you also are significantly increasing the upfront cost, the furnaces, I hear you're talking about $600, but then installing it is even more. So, you know, we're just trying to buy a little balance here. I don't think DOE, as much as they have expertise, they don't have all of the answers. And so that's why we're having these hearings. And manufacturers, I mean, it really creates, I mean, you, Mr. Peel, in your testimony, you were saying we need congressional intervention here. And I think you specifically talked about 23 new regulations coming by EPA in appliance sector. Would you elaborate on that a little bit about what it does mean to you and your employees?
Well, first of all, we have had some positive experiences along the way with DOE when we go through a process that involves stakeholder input along the way. And we've got recent examples of that as well. We also appreciate that the DOE is under pretty intense pressure to complete a bunch of regulations in a compressed time frame. The unfortunate consequence for manufacturers is we have to react to those. One makes the rules, the other has to implement the rules. So the important thing for us is to be at the table and make sure that that information, if there are challenges, for example, on gas furnaces, that those get brought to bear in the discussions and that we end up with what is the best overall solution
right.
for the industry, for consumers, and they make sense economically.
And you think that this draft with the advisory council basically does provide that additional protection and input, which should benefit everyone in America that certainly has to buy an appliance. Mr. Thompson, on the building codes, would you elaborate just a little bit on why this building code issue is so important?
I think there are several important factors, and it starts with creating model building codes that are affordable and adoptable by states, and we're seeing continued growing resistance by states to adopt building codes. if we look at a map, and I think that was included in my written testimony there, we see about 1/3 of the states that have adopted the 2012 or 2015 IECC, about 1/3 on 2009, and the balance 2006 and earlier, or they don't have a state energy code. Much of the discussion is about the cost increases that come along with adopting those codes. And so we do need to strike a balance that represents the significant impact that these codes have on housing affordability, the 10-year requirement that would be included in the bill, with also the 3, 5, and 7-year analysis, would go a long way to providing transparency in the process as to what the real simple payback cost is going to be to people. Get states to have codes presented before them that they can adopt, and then we can also talk about the compliance component, which DOE is in the midst of a pilot program currently that will start to help us better understand just what true rates of compliance we have, and that perhaps there's a significant amount of energy to be saved by increasing those compliance rates and focus on that.
And you all do support the building code section that's in this draft?
Absolutely.
Okay. And I know my time's expired, but one other thing I just want to mention. We have many members of Congress that are really focused on energy efficiency. Peter Welch has been one of those. Dave McKinley has been one of those. And we do want to come up with a good product here, but we want some balance as well. This time I recognize the gentleman from Illinois for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, one of the more contentious issues before us today that has been included in this discussion draft, as you well know, is Section 4124, which would prohibit the Department of Energy from promulgating a final rule amending efficiency standard for non-weatherized gas furnaces and mobile home furnaces. Mr. Chairman, my office has held several meetings with stakeholders on both sides of this issue, and I think it would be most beneficial for members to hear directly from DOE on these issues and other issues before we settle on language in any final draft. Today, however, we have some of the interested stakeholders that have been taking part in discussions with DOE to try and build consensus and come up with language that all sides could agree with, as was done in previous cases, including most recently the water heaters provision that Congress passed just last week with bipartisan support. As I understand it, Mr. Chairman, the language in today's discussion draft have not been agreed to by the various stakeholders, and the conversation is continuing. My view is that there would be a much better chance of getting bipartisan support for Section 4121 if the interested parties would follow the example set by the Water Heaters Coalition and come up with language that DOE, industry, energy efficiency advocates, and consumer groups could all support. With that, Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of questions that I want to ask both Mr. Sommerhalder and Ms. Knoll. To the both of you, we have received conflicting testimony from the two of you regarding the impact that this rule will have on low-income consumers. Mr. Sommerhalder, can you give us your perspective on this issue? And then I'd like to hear from Ms. Knoll for your perspective as well.
Yes, Ranking Member Rush, what we see from our customers and low-income customers is the decision to repair, replace their furnaces. When they make those decisions, if they have limitations in their ability to use an 80% versus a 92% furnace because of venting requirements and other requirements that are unique to the higher efficiency furnaces. They have to make a tough decision about what to do. That can be everything from not replace to use electric resistance heaters or some other form of heating. So what we see is that because of the limitations, there can be a decision to go with a product that's more costly if they do replace this. And you heard the numbers of $350 more for the unit itself, up to around $2,000 to install. That won't pay off because of the use of energy and how quickly that would pay off. And the end result is they either would need to make a decision to replace a unit and then incur higher costs, or they may make a decision to switch to another form of energy that is less cost effective and could produce more emissions. So we do see that impacting the low income consumers.
Ms. Knoll, would you respond, please?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Rush. First, I'd like to begin by saying that all Americans benefit from standards, particularly the low income, who oftentimes are renters and pay their the higher portion of their energy bill. And the property owner is the one that is choosing the furnace or the water heater or whatever appliance is going into that home. I'd also like to say that this is a proposal right now. It has tremendous benefit in energy savings, in consumer savings, and environmental benefit, and that we recognize the small percentage of installations that would face challenges and incur a higher cost. But we've also seen that just in this last year, new technologies and solutions have entered into the market and help overcome these challenges. And as we see those increasingly deployed, we think that that has a great opportunity to help provide solutions to these customers that are going to be facing these challenges. So we think the department needs to move forward with their open and transparent process and get input from stakeholders on this rule and find ways of making it even better. And I think that from our perspective, this is not an either-or situation. This is an and also. We also support the great utility programs and the state programs and bolstering those programs to help these vulnerable populations get into the high-efficiency furnaces, have improved weatherization that's going to have benefits to them in improved comfort and improved indoor air quality. And we commend the gas utilities like AGL Resources and others that serve their customers well through these utility programs. And those are the kind of things that complement the minimum standards and ensure that all Americans have at least a minimum level of cost-effective efficiency that will serve them and they can count on. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
As fate would have it, I have the gavel at the time I'm speaking, so I'll use myself 5 minutes for a couple of questions. My first one is for you, Mr. Summerholder. One provision of the discussion draft would scrap Section 433 of the Energy Independence and Security Act. It would allow federal buildings to use fuels like natural gas until 2030, something currently being phased out. In essence, current law bans one of our most efficient and affordable resources of energy right now. Can you talk about some benefits that we lose if natural gas is phased out from federal buildings? And do you believe that tackling Section 433 is important?
We believe the provision to reduce 433 is very important because natural gas is American, it's affordable, as you pointed out, and it's very efficient. Heating a building, as an example, with a high efficiency furnace or an 80% efficiency furnace is a very efficient way to heat that building with very affordable natural gas, American natural gas. So the ability to use natural gas, not limit that option, does provide customer benefit, savings in those buildings, savings for taxpayers. So we very much support a way to continue to use clean American natural gas in federal buildings.
Thank you. Next question is for you, Mr. Thompson. As you know, the draft bill touches on the issue of DOE's involvement in model building codes. The draft talks about transparency and about public comment. I mentioned your thoughts about on how we reach consensus there. What caught my attention, though, was the issue of payback periods and cost effectiveness. Before the private sector even thinks about making an investment, pardon me, they have to know when and if they will get into the black. I've heard some complain that this isn't always true with energy savings. I'd like to talk about the costs and benefits. Again, Mr. Thompson, today's draft bill says that when DOE supports a change to the model building code, that change must pay itself back in under 10 years. Do you think that's important, and is that realistic?
Thank you for that very thoughtful question. I think it's absolutely important, and if we intend to move families from less energy efficient homes to more energy efficient homes, we need to do it in a way that's affordable to them. And in a number of polls that have been conducted, and one in particular by the National Association of Home Builders, that really tried to identify by demographic groups how long they were willing to wait for a payback of that investment, all of them fell short of the 10-year requirement. So it's a bit of a stretch from a home buyer perspective to be willing to wait that long to get a simple payback on their investment there. If we're going to continue to drive people to more energy efficient homes, let's remember we need affordability. And this is in a marketplace that is currently very limited by financial limitations on qualifications to buyers and limitations on appraisals and how they recognize the values of energy efficient improvements to that home.
Thank you. Mr. Peel, to follow up on that, do you think the government has done a good job of considering whether energy efficiency standards are cost effective? If not, what can improve that process?
I think the results are mixed. I think we've seen some good analysis, and we would agree, and those have made it through the process through a collaborative effort, and many of them signed into law. We also see with the furnace rule that's on the table today some differences in views around what the actual costs would be and what the payback periods would be. Again, all we're asking for here is a seat at the table so we can openly discuss those issues, make sure everyone is aware, and build the consensus that we think we can get on this.
So the improvement is a seat at the table, not some law or parts of the bill, but just actually have some voice in this process. That's what you'd be happy with?
Yes. Yes, Congressman.
And my final question again is for you, Mr. Sommerhalter. There seems to be a great deal of concern about DOE's gas furnace rule. A number of groups say it's too expensive and hard to meet, and this is an issue we touch in today's discussion draft. Are there some ways we can avoid conflicts like this in the future?
We agree that there are benefits to reach consensus on this, because we all do want higher energy efficiency as we move forward. We need to do that in a way that's not only affordable, but we need to do that in a way certain customers really can't even convert because they don't have access to sidewalls for the venting requirements, and products are becoming available, but there are still limitations to how those products can be used. So we absolutely need to work together to come to consensus so that all the customers can find a way to continue to lower their costs and to help improve the environment. So we very much support a consensus process. As Mr. Peel has pointed out, we've had good success with that in the past. There are certain pieces of information that need to be considered now, and we will be able to find a way, we believe, to reach consensus.
Well, thank you. My time's expired. We now recognize Mr. Tonko from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am often stating that energy efficiency should be recognized as our fuel of choice. So I was very pleased when I heard that the committee would be legislating in this area. But this draft, I have to state, is a real disappointment. There are a few worthy provisions, but there are many others that undermine advances that we should be taking in efficiency. The provision on DOE's pending gas furnace rule in the discussion draft is of great concern to me. About 40% of the energy delivered to the residences is used for space heating. and natural gas and propane furnaces account for nearly 1/2 of that. It may be higher now since prices may have enticed some to switch heating fuels. Either way, that's a lot of energy. And gas prices may be low now, but experience tells us that is likely to change. So DE's new rule on gas furnaces would save consumers a great deal of money on their annual outlays for fuel costs. And the furnaces that deliver these savings are already on the market and make up a significant part of the current furnace market. The comment period is still open, and this rule appears to be well justified, very well justified. I'm not persuaded there's any reason to delay these standards. So, Mr. Peel, you state that DOE's rule is based on, and I quote, errors involving economic assumptions and technical issues. But later in your testimony, you cite DOE's analysis in support of your position that this rule should be delayed. Do you have information other than DOE's analysis that supports your position that, quote, the additional cost of installation cannot be economically justified?
I do have access to information. I don't have it here today. I use DOE's numbers as a conservative estimate. They are consensus numbers from DOE would agree to those numbers. There are concerns beyond just the payback. The installation complexity is a big issue as well. These are all issues that we would bring to the table in a consensus building session. So once again, to reiterate, we are not opposed to energy efficiency increases for weatherized gas furnaces. We want to make sure that the realities of the market are understood when we set these standards. So, for example, most appliances have a range of efficiencies that you can progress through, a continuum. Gas furnaces actually change technology between 80 and 90%. And so it's actually a different installation. It's not like installing a more efficient air conditioner, which is very similar to installing a less efficient air conditioner. So those are the kind of things that we want to be communicating with the DOE and other stakeholders to make sure that it's understood so we can really understand what the payback numbers are. And my feeling is that with the data we have, with the data DOE has, and other data that we've heard today, somewhere in there lies the answer. And getting together to communicate it is the key.
Well, I would appreciate you sharing any of that information with the committee. These are durable goods. They last a long time, and I think we should implement standards that save energy at this level as early as possible. And given these furnaces, as I stated, are already in the market, there are clearly possible savings there. To Ms. Knoll and Ms. Callahan, there seems to be some disagreement about the provision of this bill on building standards. Again, residences and commercial buildings stand for a long time. Is the provision on building codes consistent with having DOE do all it can to support the adoption of progressive building codes for energy efficiency?
You want me to go first?
Sure,
Thank you,
please.
Congressman. I appreciate that question. Let me say, as I said in my testimony, that we believe that the building code provisions that are in the bill currently should be struck. And I have an easy answer for the ranking member of where you find bipartisan agreement on building energy codes that will provide more transparency and will ensure that DOE plays an appropriate and a strong role in delivering us model energy codes, and that is the bill by Mr. McKinley and Mr. Welch. We have negotiated those provisions over a number of years to address the concerns of the stakeholders and the concerns of builders and the concerns of all the folks that are involved in this process. So we think that's where you can get broad bipartisan support. I want to address a couple of points, I think, where there's perhaps some obfuscation in the testimony that you've heard. Model energy codes are not set by DOE. They are set by independent code-making bodies. These are people from all across the United States, city officials, builders like Mr. Mr. Thompson, code officials, elected officials. They come together and they establish the code. Once that code is established, DOE certifies it if it saves energy, and then the states adopt it, and the localities implement and enforce the codes. So I think that that process, DOE has played an incredible, important role, but they cannot control the process. It is handled in other places. I also want to state that 39 states right now already have either the 2009, the 2012, or the 2015 code in place. This is working. And with respect to the long time, the simple payback, I think one thing that's very important to note, NAHB's own surveys show that 9 out of 10 Americans will pay 2 to 3% more so for energy efficient homes. That translates on a $100,000 home to $2,000. Most people mortgage their homes. And so when they add in the efficiency upgrade to that mortgage, it's 30 years to pay it off. And the savings that they get on their energy bill day one when they move in are greater than that additional cost. So I think that this is, the codes are there, the codes need to keep going. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Well, we wanted to hear from Ms. Knoll, though it was addressed to both.
All right, go ahead.
Please.
I will be very brief. I would just say that we achieve better model codes when the Department of Energy is able to contribute their expertise. And these model codes do increase the efficiency that can save Americans enormous amount of money in the homes in our nation.
I thank you for that. And Mr. Chair, as I yield back, might I suggest that we've got a ways to go before we live up to the title of our bill. And with that, I yield back.
This time I recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And again, I appreciate the panel for being here today. And I also appreciate the chairman for including 2 of my bills in this efficiency discussion draft, the Energy Star Program Integrity Act and the Voluntary Verification Program Act. Both of these pieces of legislation will help manufacturers and consumers while strengthening the Energy Star program. I'd also like to ask the chairman for unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 letters in support of the Energy Star program, the Energy Star Program Integrity Act, one from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the other from the Retail Industry Leaders Association.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Mr. Peel, if I could ask, why does the AVIVP give you more predictability than a DOE-run program?
There are really 3 reasons why a VIVP helps us. The first is that the predictability you mentioned is all about consistent funding. We know as an industry we're going to fund the program year over year. It's not subject to budget cuts or other DOE priorities. So we can count on resources being available to test our equipment to make sure that it complies with energy efficiency regulations. It's also cost effective. There's no taxpayer burden for this. And it's been proven effective. We've been doing it for 50 years. And we get better and better and better at it. It would be very difficult to duplicate. And what makes it work so well is that competition is the driver, is what keeps the integrity of the program. Each manufacturer competes with each other, but it's a common system that allows us to verify that everyone plays on a level playing field and abides by the rules.
Thank you. And Ms. Callahan, if I could ask why do you believe the Energy Star Integrity Act, which the gentleman from Vermont and I introduced, is important?
Well, the Energy Star program itself is very, very important. It is proven very effective in saving consumers money and in drawing in investment from manufacturers, bringing new technologies forward. We're concerned that if there's a continuation of class action suits that are not necessary, in our opinion, that will cool the sort of fervor of manufacturers for participating in this very important program. And the savings that have been coming through it since inception in the 90s are very, very significant. And we've got great consumer products now with the Energy Star label, and we don't want to see that program diminish in any way.
I just want to follow up. I want to make sure I heard that correctly, that without the Energy Star Integrity Act, that you believe that manufacturers would stop participating?
I don't know that whether they would stop or not, but I think certainly it would be an impediment to them to continue because of the extra cost and the risk involved. So I wouldn't say that it would stop all manufacturers, but I certainly think that it would cool their attraction to the program and cause some concern.
And let me just follow up briefly. Then also, do you think that the Act would prohibit all lawsuits against non-compliant Energy Star products?
Absolutely not. I mean, it's very narrowly crafted so that if a product's been certified and then found not to be in compliance and there are corrective measures put forward by EPA and those corrective measures are taken, that's where the protection comes. But if somebody's not in compliance, if somebody's not following the EPA guidelines and refusing to cooperate and come under the framework of EPA, they could still be sued.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Chairman yields back. The reason we were having a discussion up here, we have a vote on the House floor. It's just one. So we're going to keep this process going, but some people have gone to vote and they'll come back. This time I recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to all the panelists. I think it's very helpful to hear from a range of industries and stakeholders on these issues. This is a draft document, and I do think we have some work to do on it, but the goal here is to see how we can use technologies to save energy, but it has to be affordable too. And I think that's a key ingredient. I want to especially say hello to Frank Thompson, a gentleman that I've known, I think, my entire 21 years in Congress and have worked with in the Pittsburgh area for a long time. So, Frank, it's good to see you. Let me just first ask quickly, Mr. Sommerhalder, in your testimony, you talked about how Section 433 of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, the fossil fuel ban, is deeply flawed, and this current discussion draft eliminates the ban. But as Mr. Wagner mentioned, Senator Hoeven and Manchin have a bill that would repeal this requirement, but also strengthen several existing federal energy efficiency provisions to ensure large energy savings in the coming years. I'm just curious, is the Hoeven-Manchin bill something that you could support, or is there a way to make sure we use this as an opportunity to focus on more efficiency?
Yes, our major priority is clearly to make natural gas available to these buildings because of the attributes I talked about. But we have been involved in the energy standards and in a consensus process looking at what you talked about, those standards that could be put in place. So replacing it with a set of standards that we have been involved in, we can support that as a way to move forward and make sure natural gas is used in those buildings as well.
Good.
And that's a good example of where consensus can reach compromise.
Right, that's great. And that's
So is he saying that they do support the Senate bill?
Yes, we've already officially made comments that we can support that because we were involved in a part of that process and involved in those standards.
Good. That's something that's good to know as we work on the discussion. Frank, let me ask you, I mean, you know the district I represent. I don't have a lot of new homes being built. We know the new homes are pretty energy efficient, but a lot of the older homes that are built before the 90s aren't so energy efficient. And homes in my neck of the woods in the Mon Valley and parts of the city of Pittsburgh were built in the 1920s and 1930s. And I have a lot of row houses in my district, and I have a lot of senior citizens in my district that aren't going to be remortgaging their houses or doing anything like that. When their furnace goes, they've got to pay. And so we want to have a system, and I just want to express this. I'm all for energy efficiency. I've been a big proponent of it my entire time in Congress. But I also worry a little bit about some of the older residents that I represent in Allegheny counties, that probably second only to Dade County, Florida, in the number of senior citizens that live in these older homes, that if they were told that they had to replace a furnace and then do some structural changes to these older homes, I just worry what that does to them cost-wise. And I just want to know, what are, we've had a lot of successes with new housing and making them more energy efficient. What do you think about are some of the major successes that we have in making older homes more efficient, aside from, we have tax credits in the Tenant Star program, but what other ways do you think we can encourage energy efficiency in these older homes? And maybe you could just speak a little bit to these urban areas like mine that have houses, that are stacked together in rows, and how that works if you have to change venting systems in that.
Well, I think there were three questions there. So let me start with the furnace provisions there. And I think some of the flaws in what DOE has presented and why we need to get this advisory group together and get the stakeholders at the table and improve on what they've proposed are the exact circumstances you described there and the consequences there of trying to bring that new technology, that condensing furnace to a structure that wasn't built that way. And it could be thousands of dollars that they aren't going to go out and take a mortgage. They're going to have to come out of pocket for it. So we need to find some alternatives that are going to address those situations there. In terms of how we best address continuing to improve energy efficiency in older homes, I think we need to continue a lot of the programs, the tax incentives that have been in place. They work. We need to make sure that they're going to continue to be there, because the reality is that the greatest energy users, the gas guzzlers, so to speak, amongst houses are those older homes.
Right.
And it is very costly to come in and retrofit them. So let's keep some programs out there that are going to help temper those costs.
Great.
And
thanks, Frank.
yeah.
I see my time is up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Mr. McKinley from West Virginia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and given the time frame, I'm not going to be able to get to all my questions that I had, but let's just see if we can focus on the first is when I came to Congress 4 years ago, that was the thing I left was an engineering practice that was dealt deeply into energy efficiency. So we have some working knowledge that we're bringing to the table, and what we've done the first few years was nibble around the edges of energy efficiency as we try to educate the public and the other members about what we have to do. And one of the most important things that I think we're about, Tonko and I are embarking on, is now we're going to try to dive deeply into the issue of turbines and look at that when we're talking about single turbines at 35% and combined capacities of maybe 60 at best, but more likely at 45 or 50%. So we're looking at what we can do with that. We know that this bill that we have that we're putting forth is going to provide some form of demonstration project that we can look at the steam injection, raising inlet temperatures. We can increase pressure ratios. We know all these things are going to improve, so that we're going to use a lot. It's probably the most efficient bill that we could pass on efficiency is looking at how we create electricity. So is it too early? So I'm going to ask that to you, Mr. Somerhalder. Coming from the Gas Association, do you think this Congress is ready to take on such a huge subject as to improve the efficiency of our turbines and our electric generation? Because we know that China and Japan are very actively out there participating in a robust fashion, and we're going to wind up playing second fiddle.
Exactly. And as an association and as a company, I mean, we supply today combined cycle turbines at central stations that have efficiencies of around 60%. They've been engineered that well. So we know it's capable, the industry is capable of finding a way to continue to improve efficiencies. And we've seen the benefit of distributed generation, from microturbines to combined heat and power to fuel cells. And so we do believe that we need to put in place research and incentives to continue to make progress on that, because those are additional ways to make sure that we're the most efficient and the most cost effective for the consumers in the long run. So that, in addition to using very efficient furnaces, whether they're 80% or 92% for heating, all that together can produce a very good result. So we support additional effort in those areas.
But we're going to make an all-out effort to see if we can't get, if nothing else, just to get the dialogue going, to educate the American public as well as what the problems are. Because just imagine what other entity would find acceptable at 60% efficiency. If we let the post office off at 40% of their deliveries weren't appropriate. So having said that, let me go back to Mr. Thompson on homes. A component of my practice had been designing and building homes. And I knew that one of the issues we were facing there was indoor air quality. And again, it's a process of education. I don't think Congress and the American public understand a lot of these issues that we're dealing with on Clean Air Act really have a genesis back in their home, because we know that we spend 90% of our time indoors and 60% of our time in our homes, but yet we're not addressing some of those problems. So I'm curious, you as a home builder and the Home Builders Association, what are you doing from an association to address these issues of indoor air quality?
As the building codes have continued to tighten up the air changes per hour in a house, and we saw that in the 2012 and reinforced in the 2015 codes of reducing those air changes per hour, that potential is increased. It's got to be resolved through mechanical ventilation, which is a requirement in the building code if you're less than 5 air changes an hour. Interestingly enough, a number of the states that adopted the 2012 IECC chose to move that number that was in the IECC from 3 air changes an hour back up to 5 or over. I believe only one of those states kept it at that because it's a danger level there. And
well,
we're really into a lot of uncharted territory that we need more building science to best understand how we can maintain air quality, minimize mold, and continue to have energy efficiency.
And Joe, in the time I have, my concern is that we're seeing as SOx and NOx gases have been decreasing and CO2 emissions, but yet we're seeing more asthma attacks, and as a result, it's not because of the coal-fired power plants. We believe there's science that we justify from the American Lung Association and others that a lot of this is having to do with our indoor air quality.
Yes, sir.
So the asthma increase is not because of coal and gas-fired power plants.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your time, and I apologize for running.
Thank you. And I apologize. The votes popped up out of nowhere, so we'll have a brief recess. Let members come back who might want to ask some questions. So please stand by for maybe 5 minutes or so. I apologize so much for this, but we stand in recess.